Chapter the 31st. Rosicrucian supposed means of magic through signs, sigils, and figures. Course shifting. The dragon's head is the point where the moon or other planet commences its northward latitude. It is considered masculine and benevolent in its influence. The dragon's tail is the point where the planet's southward progress begins. It is feminine and malevolent. The dragon mystically is the self-willed spirit, which is externally derived into nature by the fall into generation. The same fine Catholic nature, which in its preternatural exaltation appears so very precious in the eyes of the philosopher, is in the common world defiled, abiding everywhere in putrefactions and the vilest forms of seemingly sleeping, but in reality most active forms of life. According to Enemoser, Magiusea Madsusi signified the office and knowledge of the priest, who is called Magius Majusi, and afterwards Magi. And magician. Brucker maintains that the positive meaning of the word is fire worshipper, worship of the light, to which opinion he had been led by the Mohammedan dictionaries. In the modern Persian, the word is mag, and magbed signifies high priest. The high priest of the Parsis at Surat, even at the present day, is called Mobd. The mythic figure placed in the front of the Irish harp, the meaning of which we have explained in a previous part of our book, and which is now represented as a woman with the lower parts twined as foliage, or as scrolls, into the body of the harp, is properly a siren. This siren is the same as Venus Aphrodite, Astarte, the sea deity or woman deity, the Dagon or idol of the Syrians, Tyrians, or Phoenicians, hence her color is green in the Iona Iern, or Irish acceptation. The woman or virgin of the Irish harp, who is impaled on the stalk or tree of life, the siren whose fatal singing means her mythic Buddhistic penance of existence, the Medusa whose insupportable beauty congeals in its terror the beholder to stone, according to the mythologists. This magic being is translated from the sign of Virgo in the heavens, and sent mythically to travel, condemn the verdant line of beauty, or the Kabbalistic Benedicta linea viriditatis. The whole of the meaning, notwithstanding its glory, is nonetheless sacrifice. The woman of the harp of the seven strings, or the seven vocables, vowels, or aspirations, or intelligent breathings, or musical notes, or music-producing planets, is purely an astrological sigma, although a grand one, adopted into heraldry. In the old books of heraldry, the curious inquirer will find this woman or virgin of the Irish harp, to whom, in the modern heraldic exemplification, celestial wings are given, and who is made beautiful as an angel, represented as a dragon with extended forky pinions, and piscine, or semifish, like or basilisk extremity. There is a wonderful 1. Refluent, or interfluent, unaccountable connection, in the old mythology, between the woman, the dragon, or the snake, and the sea. So that sometimes, in the obscure hints supplied in the picturesque, suggestive ancient fables, it is really difficult to distinguish one from the other. The associations of an interchangeable character between dark and light, and dragon and hero, ascribing to each some mystic characteristic of the other, cannot be all fabling accident. There are hints of deep mysteries, transcendent in their greatness and beauty, lying under these things in some concealed real way. To bring these to the surface, to discover their origin, and, to the justifiable and guarded extent, to assign them properly, has been our aim. There must have been some governing, excellent armorial reason, special and authorized, for the changing of this first figure of a dragon into a woman, or a siren, or virgin, on the Irish harp, and this fact assists the supposition of an identity at some time of these two figures, all drawn from the double sign Virgo-Scorpio in the zodiac. There is a strange confirmation of the account of creation in the book of Genesis, in the discovery of he, woman, and snake in the most ancient Babylonian or Chaldean zodiac. The Indian zodiacs and the Egyptian zodiacs repeat the same myth, slightly varied in certain particulars. The different versions of the story of the temptation and fall, in the main respects, are the same legend, only altered to suit ideas in every varying country. Traversing all the long-descended paths of the mythologies, this singular, but in reality sublime, myth preserves its place and recurs up to the last in its identity. The first chapter of Genesis seems to us to be clearly found here in the signs of the zodiac, which we know are derived from the earliest astronomical studies, and which extraordinary hieroglyphical zodiacal figures descended originally from the summit of the famous Tower of Bel, or Belus, the first observatory where the movements and the story of the stars were at the outset noted, and handed as from the earliest expositors of the secrets of the heavens. This procession of 12, under the name of the zodiac, tells in its signs the history of the making of the world, according to the Chaldeans and Egyptians, and also, in the hidden way, according to the account in the Bible. As the little and the large have sometimes a closer connection than is ordinarily supposed, we will pass on now to some more familiar and commonplace examples. It may be worthwhile to dwell with greater minuteness on the little understood origin of those light auxiliary troops as they were organized originally, the modern hussars. This irregular, lightly equipped European cavalry plays an important part as a skirmishing or foraging force. We are all accustomed to see elegantly appointed light cavalry called hussars, and doubtless many persons have frequently wondered as to the origin of that dolman pelisse or loose jacket, which is worn, contrary to all apparent use, dangling an encumbrance rather than a cover or defense, on the trooper's left shoulder. This pelisse, richly embroidered in the Eastern fashion, is always the genuine distinctive mark or badge, with the Wallachian or Hungarian or Oriental busby of the hussar. The precise time when this originally loosely disciplined and heathen soldiery came into Europe is not fixed. They now form a dazzling and formidable branch of light cavalry service everywhere. All armies of modern times possess regiments of hussars. They came originally from Tartary in the east, and they brought with them their invariable mark, the rough fur cap, or Ishmaelitish or Esau-like black head cover. They adventured into the west with the now thickly ornamented and embroidered trophy called the pelisse or skin coat. This pelisse is an imitation or reminder, and is the very remote symbol or garment, or cover of shame, as it is called, with which, for very singular Kabbalistic reasons, the two dutiful sons of Noah covered and atoned for that disgrace of their father, when, after he had planted a vineyard, and had drunken of the wine, he lay disgracefully extended in his tent, and was seen by his son Ham, whom Noah denounced. The hussars were originally Eastern Saracenic, or Moslem cavalry, the horsetails and jingles, or numberless little bells, which ought to distinguish the caparisons of hussars to the modern day, and which are part of the special insignia of their origin, are all Oriental in their character, like the bells of the wandering Zingari, Moris, or Moresque, or Gypsy, or Bohemian fantastical dancers. Deep lying in the magical ideas of the Eastern peoples was the sacredness and the efficacy against evil spirits of their small bells, like the bells of the Chinese pagodas. All bells, in every instance, even from the giant bell of the Domkirche or Duomo or the cathedrals of Kazan, Moscow or Moscow generally, down to the knell, or the sacring, or warning bell of the Romish Mass, are held to disturb and to scare and drive off evil spirits. These were supposed, according to the old superstitious ideas, to congregate thickly, with opportunities accidentally offered either in the din of battle to impair invisibly the exertions of the combatants, or in the church to spoil the Eucharist by tempting the celebrating priest, or hampering or hindering the ceremonial and its triumphant sacred climax. The Eastern name of Venus is Ihuza or Husa, which stands for the Egyptian divine woman, or Isis. Ihuza means the hyacinth, acacia, or lily, sacred to the woman, or to the complying and therefore productive powers of nature. The word hussar comes, through circuitous paths of translation, from its original al-Husa. These hussars are the alert, agile, armed children or soldiers of Cybele. It is well known that the knights of old, particularly the Crusaders when they returned to the West, adopted the Oriental fashion of covering their appointments and horse furniture with bells, the jingle raised by which, and at the same time the spreading or flying out in onset of the lambrequin or slit scarf attached to the helmet, with the shouted war cry or cri de guerre, struck terror into the opposed horse and rider. Naturalists suppose that even the spangled tail of the peacock with its emerald eyes answers a similar purpose when spread out, of frightening animals who intend an attack. The knights, therefore, may have borrowed the hint of thus startling their foes, and of confusing them with the sudden display of colors and disturbing points, as if sprung from a spontaneous, instant alarming center from the peacock when startled by an enemy. The bird has also his terrifying outcry, similar to the knight's mot de guerre, or individual 66 motto. The Hebrew priests were directed to fringe their garments round about with bells and pomegranates, in the words of the text. The use and intention of these bells and pomegranates have been subjected to much discussion, particularly a passage which we now cite: a golden bell and a pomegranate upon the hem of the robe round about. And it shall be upon Aaron to minister, and his sound shall be heard when he goeth in unto the holy place before the Lord, and when he cometh out, that he die not. The reason supposed in the Targum for the directions given to the priest in these two verses of the chapter containing the law is that the priest's approach should be cautious to the innermost holy of holies, or sanctuary of the tabernacle. The sound of the small bells upon his robe was intended to announce his approach before his actual appearance, in order to recall the attention of the 1. Angel of the Lord to the fact of the coming of a mortal, so that he who was supposed to be then personally descended, and possibly brooding in the secret shrine or penetralia, might be allowed time to gather up and concentrate his presence, which no man can be permitted to behold and live, and to withdraw. For the divinity to be seen by the profane eye is guilt and annihilation to the latter. Therefore the gods and all spirits have in every account of their appearance been seen in some worldly form, which might be acceptable to, and supportable by, a human face. There is, theoretically, such contrariety and such fatal difference to the constitution of man in the actual disclosure of a spirit that it is wholly impossible except by his death therefore spirits and divine. Appearances have always been invested in some natural escape or guise, by the medium of which the personal communication, whatever it might be made without alarm, and without that bodily disturbance of nervous assent which should destroy. This alarm would, by the utter upsetting of the mind, and the possible fatal effect, otherwise have rendered the disclosure impossible. The denial of the interior parts of a sanctuary, or adytum, to the priests of the temple, or even to the chief hierarch sometimes, is supposed to have arisen on this account. Mythological story is full of the danger of breaking in unpreparedly upon spiritual presences, or of venturing into their haunts rashly or foolhardily. The real object and purpose of the veil to the Hebrew temple, and of the curtains and enclosures ordered in the Jewish ceremonial complicated arrangements, are certainly of this class. Thus, in the idea that God did really pass down at chosen times from heaven, even in a possible visible shape, to his altar, the sacred place was carefully shut in, and all access to it set round with rigid, awful caution. There is fine and subtle meaning in that old expression in Genesis, unless self-disclosed, to brood, as if to be fixed or wrapped, and thus to be self-contained and oblivious, even inattentive. The ancients, the Greeks especially, constructed their temples originally without roofs, in order that there might be no obstacle interposed by them to the descent of the god to the temple which was especially raised in his honor. He was imagined, at favorable opportunities, to descend either visibly or invisibly into his appropriate temple, and it was not to seem to exclude, but rather in every way to invite straight from the supernal regions, that the ancients left open the direct downward way to the penetralia. From this sacred point, when the god was supposed to be expected or present, every eye, even that of the high priest, was shut out. The covered temple, or the sealed temple, of which the chapter house, or particular temple, with a crown, or cap, or cover, presents the small example, is the Domus Templi, or Domus Dei, where the manifested God is supposed to be enclosed, or wherein man is made flesh, the microcosmos or spirit within his cincture, or walls, or castle of comprehension, or of senses. 1. Hieroglyph of transfixion, salient out of the crescent moon, man, born of woman. Astrum. Rosicrucians, the alchemic magisterium, or stone. Letters of all languages are significant marks or symbols which have the 12, or rather the original 10 signs of the zodiac for their beginning. Of these letters, there is a certain group which has, in the characters of all languages, a secret hieroglyphical hagiographical reference to the originally single and afterwards double sign Virgo Scorpio, which is supposed to give the key to the secret or Kabbalistic story of creation. These letters are S and Z, L and M, or rather a group which is marked by A, P, M, Sigma, S, Z, L, M, 5, W. The significant aspirates or vowel sounds follow the same rule. The snake-like glyph, or mystery of the serpent, or disguise in which the recusant principle is supposed to have invested himself, has coiled, and projects significant curves and inflections through all this group of letters and sounds which is perceivable, by a close examination and quick ear, in all languages, living and dead. The sigma presents itself to the eye in the Hebrew, the Sanskrit, the Persian, the Arabic, the Coptic, the Old Gothic, the Georgian, or Iberian, the ancient Armenian, the Ethiopic, or Ge'ez, the Slavonic, the Greek, the Latin, the Samaritan, the Irish, the Etruscan. Of all which alphabets and the symbols serving for their numerals, we had prepared a comparative table to prove the identity of the sign Virgo Scorpio and its ciphers, but we forbore in deference to our limits which did not advisedly admit of the addition. A comparative display of all marks or symbols which give occult expression to the female side of nature and its astronomical and astrological signs affords the same result of identity. The marks of the signs M, P, and M and their ciphers are interchangeable and reflect intimately from one to the other. It must be remembered that the sign Libra, our modern September, the hinge point or balance center of the two wings of the celestial zodiac, was an addition by the Greeks. Here, according to the Sabaean astrological tradition, the origin of good and evil, of the malefic and the benevolent Kabbalistic investments of nature, the beginning of this two-sexed, intelligent sublunary world, were to be found, all contained in the profoundest mysteries of this double sign. The Kabbalistic theory and the Chaldean reading is that the problems of the production of the sensible world are not to be read naturally, but supernaturally. It was held that man's interior natural law is contained in God's exterior magical law. It followed from this that present nature is secondary nature, that man is living in the ruins of the angelic world, and that man himself is a ruin. Man fell into the degradation of nature as the result of the seduction by the woman, which produced the generations according to man's ideas. The strange theories as to the history of the first world prevalent among the Kabbalists imply that the appearance of woman upon the scene was an obtrusion, in the sense of a thing unintended. Thus, her advent upon the scheme of creation to use one of their mysterious expressions was at a late 66. Even accidental and unexpected in a certain sense, spoiled an evil period of the world which had sunk from the supernatural into the natural. As woman had no part in the earliest world, and as her origin was altogether of another nature and from other sources than that of man, the traces of her introduction and the hints as to her true character are to be found mystically in the original sign Virgo Scorpio, double-sided at first, but afterwards divided. These divided personalities were set thereafter in mythologic opposition. The reader is referred to the zodiac on P62, figure 12, where will be found the diagram illustrative of this idea, which was originated amidst the magic of the Syro-Chaldeans. It yet remains the key to all the mythologies and to all the religions. The sign, Virgo Scorpio, stands in the present order of things, or in this non-angelic or mortal world, as a divided sign, because in the world of man, as born of woman, enmity has been placed between the snake and the woman. Thenceforth, from the fall, and as a consequence of it, they are in opposition. The sign of the balances is placed between, as the rescuing heavenly shield, miraculously interposed, separating, as the tremendous aegis, the two originally conjoint signs, and simultaneously presented both ways, defending each from destruction by either he until the time shall be complete, which means the apocalyptic, new heaven and new earth. Marks, movements, or influence from the side of Scorpio, or from the sinister side, are malign and mean danger, because they represent the old serpent, or, in other terms, the great deep, or matter. Of such magic character are the letters S and Z, and all their compounds, because this originally single sound or letter SZ, ZS, came into the world representing its sinful side. Man is pardoned through the promise to the woman, and woman is saved because through her the savior of the world, or the rescuer of the world, or the deified man, or the sacrifice came into the world. Woman has the intermediate office of reconciling and alpha. Mysterium, astrotheosophic chart, dominion of the moon in man's body, as she passes through the 12 zodiacal signs. 1. Aries, head and face 2. Taurus, neck and throat 3. Gemini, arms and shoulders 4. Cancer, breast and stomach 5. Leo, heart and back 6. Virgo, venter 7. Libra, reins and loins 8. Scorpio, genitalia 9. Sagittarius, hips and thighs 10. Capricorn, knees and hams 11. Aquarius, legs and ankles 12. Pisces, feet and toes tracked western or Roman right. Mysterium, sun rises, east, holy of holies, the Blessed Lady, St. John. Crown of glory, crown of thorns. Apse or apsis, man's side, dexter, north transept, right hand, woman's side, sinister, south transept, left hand, axis inclined regulating the seasons and the hours of the day and night. Core or choir. South meridian, omega, body nave, from navel, ship, or ark. Place of fawns. 2 nails in the male sacred pillar jachin, fountain or font. Latin rite, in the feet, 1 nail in the Greek rite. Female, sacred L pillar Boaz. Wine, bread, twin western towers or spires. Galilee, west porch for the people, west, sunsets. Night, eastern or Greek rite, procession of the logos or word, according to the Gnostics. Mysterium.
Concludimus itac cum trismegista, mundum esse de imagine. Omnum vero mundo, et quod, per consequens propter suam cum munda similitudine, homo haud impropri mundus minor so microcosmus descendus, et in omnibus more mundi majora so macrocosmi sit consideramus.
Tertius Parvis the Pax X. Ipsi in tres distinguitur caelos. Digitized by Google B1. Head. 2. Neck. 3. Shoulders. 4. Breasts. 5. Chest. 6. Back. 7. Venter. 8. Thighs. 9. Epsilon upsilon ZT eta sigma, ne TLV 10. Legs, KO 11. Ankles, alfaxi 12 feet, MN, I. Unum est empireum silicit pars intellectualis, in qua mens intellectus, ratio residens in capite.
Robertus de fluctibus, Rosicrucian. 2. Alterum sidetherum, sulice facultas vitalis, in qua situm liberum arbitrium, residens in pector, su in medio pectoris corda.
Ad quam sensitiva sive animalis refertur, in movante residens. Therefore the nave or navel, astrotheosophic chart, souling, in the abstract sense as Virgo intacta, woman is free and unconscious of that deadly original sin, which in the disobedience to the divine command lost man, his place in the scheme of the immortal world. All this is part of the Kabbalistic view of the mysteries of creation. The Kabbalists say that the lost man Adam should not have yielded to those which he found the irresistible fascinations of Eve, but should have contented himself to speak in parable with his enjoined other impersonated delights, whom he outraged in this preference, winning death as its punishment. This is, of course, obscure, because it is a part of the secret unwritten Kabbalah, never spoken in direct words, never referred to except in parable. In the views of the refining Gnostics, woman is the accidental unknowing obtrusion upon the universal design. The ideal woman is spiritually free from the curse and corruption of things material. From these ideas came the powers superstitiously imagined to be possible in the virgin state and capable of being exercised by virgin woman. All the marks and forms connected with these prescribed letters, S and Z, have, on their material and worldly side, the character of charms, sigils, and talismans in the evil sense or dark sense. They were supposed to be means of magic by the old soothsayers. The celebrated Lord Monboddo produced a very elaborate treatise, quite contrary to recognized ideas, to show that speech was not natural to man, but that language was a result of the primeval fall, and that the punishment of Babel signified the acquisition of the tongues, and not the confusion of language. This idea is sufficiently startling. A general display of the S's and the Z's, and their involutions, combinations, and sounds in all languages would result in a persuasion of their serpentine origin. The forms of these snake-like glyphs and their cursive lines in all the alphabets will, on examination, present the same suspicious undulation. These letters have an intimate refluent connection with all the signs which mean the sea, the great deep, matter in the abstract, or the personified receptive feminine principle, which eventually is to be the conqueror of the dragon or enemy. We thus desire to show the unity of the myths and the forms made use of for the expression of religious ideas in the glory of woman. Woman, in fact, is the maker of nature, as we know nature. We wish the reader particularly to take notice that the above singular notions are in no way shared by us, further than as occurring in our account of some of the strange reveries of the Illuminati, or Gnostics, due therefore in our comments. I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. A careful and critical inspection of all the alphabets or letter forms, whether cursive or fluent, or rigid and rectangular, as in the Greek and still more obviously in the Latin, will show that certain ideas are expressed pictorially in them. Two principal ideas seem to be furtively suggested. These are the upright or phallus, and the cross line or snake, whether the horizontal be undulated or direct. In the Greek letters, these ideas make the form. The first letters, according to the Kabbalists, were the original 10 signs of the zodiac, which contained mythologically the history of the making of the world. These 10 signs afterwards multiplied and produced other broods of letters, some of which were the cuneiform and early tree, like alphabets. There seems to be an event symbolized or pictured in the alphabets. This mystic idea, which is hidden in the hieroglyphics called letters, is supposed by the more profound of the Talmudists to be the introduction of man into the world through the very fact and the force of his fall, or as arising through the temptation, the chief, which is the snake. Thus every agent or efficient in letter is an anagram, various phases of the 66 of man, woman, and snake, in story. Each letter has embodied in it the legend of the temptation, and conceals it safely in a sign.
Ut omnia uno tenore current, redimus ad mysticam serpentis significationem. Si igitur sub serpentis imagine phallicum signum intelligimus, quam plana, sinit consigna cuncta pictura lineamenta. Niquenum pro fallo poneritur serpens nisi res significata cum typo accurate congruit.
He, the late Dr. Donaldson, has a dissertation upon the word AP, which is translated heel in Genesis 2. 15. Adduces Jeremiah the 12th 22 and Nahum the 3rd. 5. And, comparing the words made use of in the original, shows that the heel is a euphemism, as are the feet in Isaiah the 7th. 20. His exhaustive argument demonstrates that the part intended to be signified by the word is pudenda mulibria. The whole proves the extreme importance, in the mythical and magical sense, of this unexpected figure, and throws quite a new philosophical light on it. These views fortify completely our Rosicrucian explanation of the origin of the Order of the Garter and other kindred subjects fully heretofore discussed in our book. This significant connection of the two figures, the phallus and the discus, explains the text in Genesis 1:27, male and female created he them, that is 7 gladius, sword, sheath. In this latter word, the part which characterizes the female is used for the woman herself. Q. In this connection, Kaaba, the Kaaba at Mecca, and Kab or Kab, standing for Kabbalah, Kabbalah, Gibala, Qibla, or Ark or Mysteri, the grand central point of all religions, A modern learned writer, Thomas Inman, M.D., gives the following as an interpretation of the passage: "Thou shalt bruise his head, and he shall bruise thy heel, glofa."
Priam fascini congressio tollet et cabet aegis humila facet, sed infligit injuriam morditura mentula, quam impregnationem efficit et uteri per novas mensis tumorum preferred.
This may explain the reason why the cube of the Phrygian cap in the ancient sculptures of the armed female is worn in reverse, or at the back of the head, as shown in Figs. 207 and 208, p. 256. The celebrated philosopher Petrus Gasendus assailed the system of Robertus de Fluctibus, or Robert Flood, and criticized it at great length in his work entitled Examen in qua Principia Philosophia Roberti Fludi, Medici, Reteguntur, published at Paris in 1630. But he never really seized the spirit of Flood's system, and he wasted his force. He did not comprehend, nor could he ever realize, the Rosicrucian views with the largeness of insight of a man of great critical powers, which Gasendus otherwise undoubtedly possessed. Gasendus, however, was a prejudiced theologian, and was ill-calculated for a disquisition upon a secret philosophy so remote and subtle. Before an insight of greater depth, of more readiness, and less obstinacy, the difficulties presented by Flood melt away, even converting into brilliancy in new proofs. His exhaustive logical positions, indeed, the necessity of his theorems, are soon recognized by an investigator when he shakes off trammels and clears himself of prepossessions. But a rapid and complete philosophical grasp, extraordinary in its decision, is indispensable. Flood's system is profound, shadowy, difficult, and deep-lying. Short of consummate judgment and clear, fine mind in those to whom they are submitted, Flood's ideas, in their very strangeness and apparent contradiction, startle and bewilder, because they contradict all the accepted philosophies, or at least all their conclusions, and stand alone. The ordinary recognized knowledge, aired from the current accumulation, opposes him. Flood's deeper teaching, by its very nature and through the character of those from whom it sprung, is secret, or at all events evading, where the knowledge is not wholly suppressed. As an instance of the impossibility of accepting Flood's ideas, if these were such, Gasendus charges him with a stupendous puzzle, that of passing the entire interpretation of Scripture over, not to the mystics only, but to alchemy. Gasendus asserts, as the opinion of Flood, that the key of the Bible mysteries is really to be found in the processes of alchemy and of the Hermetic science, that the mystical sense of Scripture is not otherwise explainable than by the philosopher's stone, and that the attainment of the great art, or of the secrets which lie locked, is heaven, in the Rosicrucian profundities. Old and New Testament and their historical accounts are alike hermetic in this respect. The Grand Magisterium, the great work, as the alchemists call it, is mythed by Moses in Genesis, in the deliverance from Egypt, in the passage of the Red Sea, in the Jewish ceremonial law, in the lives of the patriarchs and prophets, such as Abraham, David, Solomon, Jacob, Job. In this manner, the true Kabbalists are supposed to be alchemists, in common with the Magi, the sages, philosophers, and priests, when these possessed the true and only knowledge. The just man made perfect is the alchemist, who, having found the philosopher's stone, becomes glorified and immortal by the use of it. To be said to die is when the material elements can no longer maintain or cohere. To rise is when the immaterial life or spark is liberated out of its perishable temporary investment. To be glorified is when the powers or independence are attained which properly appertain to the supernaturally perfect light, into which, like Enoch or Elijah, the Rosicrucian is transfigured, and in which he knows all, can be all, and do all. It is this draught of immortality which enables him to assume what form he will, by passing through nature as its master and renewing his body by means of his art projected by nature through to the other side of nature. The adept stands in the place of nature, and does that with the obstruction of matter separating by dissolution the pure from the impure, which it takes unassisted nature. Fully commented upon in the latter part of this work. Ages perhaps to effect. The alchemist is supposed to be superior to nature to that extent, that he can pass through it and work on it and in it on the other side. It is here, in this true anima mundi, or soul of the world, that the alchemist or Rosicrucian regathers the light dispersed or shaken out of its old broken forms. Gold is the flux of the sunbeams, or of light, suffused invisibly and magically into the body of the world. Light is sublimated gold, rescued magically, by invisible stellar attraction, out of the material depths. Gold is thus the deposit of light, which of itself generates. Light in the celestial world is subtle, vaporous, magically exalted gold, or spirit of flame. Gold draws and compels inferior natures in the metals, and, intensifying and multiplying, converts into itself. It is a part of the first formed glory, or splendor, of which all objects and all souls are points or parts. Sixth Gesendus asserts that when the Rosicrucians teach that the divinity is the light or the realization of creation displayed from the beginning to the end of the whole visible or comprehensible frame, they mean that the divine being is not possible or existent according to human idea, unless he, or the original light, is manifested or expressed in some special comprehensible, other light or form. The second reflects the glory of the first light, and is that in which the first displays. This second light, or anima mundi, is manifestation, or the Son as proceeding from the Father. This synthesis is the light breath life aura or sacred spirit. It is the solar or golden alchemical soul, which is the sustainment and perfection of everything. All lies between hermetic rarefaction and condensation, mortal and spiritual both. 6 is not the devil, the deep darkness, or matter, the terra damnata et maledicta, which is left at the bottom of the process of the supreme distiller, who condenses and evokes the light from out of it, is not Lucifer, the lord of the false light and the splendors of the visible world. Can the prince and ruler of this relegate or lower world soar with his imitations? Can the adversary pass into the region of God's light? Can he rise anew to combat in that heaven where he has already encountered the mighty ones who have driven him down? And can he there spread again, like a cloud, his concentrate darkness? The Kabbalists and Talmudists aver that scripture, history, fable, and nature are alike obscure and unintelligible without their interpretation. They aver that the Bible is the story of heavenly things put forward in a way that can be alone comprehensible by man, and that without their Kabbalah, and the parables in which they have chosen to invest its revelation, not religion only, but even familiar nature, the nature of things and of men, is unintelligible. 1. It has been a common opinion, and it so remains, that there is no such thing as the philosopher's stone, and that the whole history and accounts of it are a dream and a fable. A multitude of ancient and modern philosophers have thought otherwise. As to the possibility of metals transmuting from one into the other, and of the conversion of the whole material into gold, Libavius brings forward many instances in his treatise De Natura Metallorum. He produces accounts to this effect out of Geberus, Hermes, Arnaldus, Guatius, Thomas Aquinas, Bernardus Comes, Joannes Rundius, Baptista Porta, Rubius, Dornesius, Vogelius, Pinotus, Quercetanus, and others. Franciscus Picus, in his book De Oro CCC3C2, gives 18 instances in which he saw gold produced by alchemical transmutation. To those who allege the seeming impossibility, he rejoins that difficult things always 1. Seem at first impossible, and that even easy things appear impracticable to the unskilled and unknowing. The principles and grounds for concluding that there may be such an art possible as alchemy we shall sum up as follows. Firstly, it is assumed that every metal consists of mercury as a common versatile and flexible base, from which all metals spring, and into which they may be ultimately reduced by art. Secondly, the species of metals and their specific and essential forms are not subject to transmutation, but only the individuals, in other words, what is general is abstract and invisible, what is particular is concrete and visible, and therefore can be acted upon. Thirdly, all metals differ, not in their common nature and matter, but in their degree of perfection or purity towards that invisible light within everything, or celestial glory, or base for objects which has matter as its mask. Fourthly, art surmounteth and transcendeth nature, for art directed upon nature may in a short while perfect that which nature by itself is 1,000 years in accomplishing. Fifthly, God hath created every metal of its own kind, and hath fixed in them a principle of growth, especially in the perfect metal gold, which is the master of the material, and which in itself has magnetic seed, or magic light, an unseen and heavenly power, unknown in this world, but which can by art be evoked, be made to inspire and multiply and take in all matter. It is said of the alchemical philosophers that no sooner did they attain this precious stone or power than the very knowledge of it, in the magic surprise at its existence, delighted them more than aught that the world could give. They made greater use of it in its supernatural effects upon the human body than in turning it upon the base matter, to make gold of this latter which they treated with contempt. And in answer to those who would ask what was the reason that those supposed greatest of all philosophers did not render themselves and their friends rich by a process so speedy and thorough, it was rejoined that they wanted not, that they were satisfied in the possession of the ability, that they lived in the mind, that they rested satisfied in theory and declined practice, that they were so overcome and astonished at the immensity of the power accorded by God's grace to man, that they disdained to become gold makers to the greedy, or suppliers to the possible idle and mischievous needy, and that they were afraid to be made the prey and sacrifice of avaricious, cruel tyrants, which would be but too surely their fate if they were, through vainglory, or temptation, or avoidable effects of force, to make known their wondrous gifts, or to disclose or betray the fact of the supernatural method of their existence, clearly at the safest in being disbelieved and being looked upon as lie or delusion. Therefore, these conclusive reasons, and others similar, impelled the society to hide from the world not only their stupendous art, but also themselves. They thus remained the unknown, invisible, illuminated Rosicrucians, or brethren of the Rosy Cross, regarding whose presence and intentions no one knows anything, or ever did know anything, truly and in reality, although their power has been felt in the ages, and still remains unsuspectedly conspicuous, all which we think we have in some measure proved, and shall still farther establish before we arrive at the end of our book. Digitized by Google, Chapter the 33rd, Rosicrucian Celestial and Terrestrial. Unscientious readers will thank the man who states accurately that which they agree with, but will be almost equally grateful to the man who states clearly what they most dissent from. What they want is either truth or error, not a muddle between them. The reason of the real superlative importance of the ideas entertained by people respecting the Rosicrucians is that they were really magical men, appearing like real men, carrying, in very deed, through the world eternally forbidden secrets. Safe, however, in the fact that they were sure never to be believed. De Quincey, who has written the most lucid and intelligible speculation concerning these profoundest of mystics, and which account, though humanly lucid and intelligible, groping as it were at the claims of these men, is yet as far from the truth and as different to the real beliefs of the Rosicrucians as darkness is from light. De Quincey says, in exemplification of the grandeur of their mystery, to be hidden amidst crowds is sublime. To come down hidden amongst crowds from distant generations is doubly sublime. It is very little reflected upon, but it is no less a truth, which is therefore contradictory, that if you take away man from out the universe, that no universe remains. There cannot be any proof of there being anything outside of us when you take away man, to whom alone the world is, for to any other intelligence than man's, the world real cannot be. And hence arises a curious question. It is whether space as occurring as an idea in sleep would be real space. The truth of time and of space depend alone upon this question. Consider the depth of void into which thought has the power to extend. Consider the preposterous wall of separation which divides living human life from the life of the world, even next off this world. Not to speak of possibly multitudinous other worlds, which stretch for all we know to the contrary, we know not whither. And these possibilities or metaphysical intelligible worlds, of what kind, of what nature, or of what character we can conceive, we understand not what they are, or how they are, or why they are. Indeed, penetrating down to this truth, we know not why we ourselves exist or what we are, for we, that is the human race, are not intelligible. Creation is not intelligible. That single word, somehow alone, covers the whole of our knowledge. The entire ground next off this ground of senses is wholly conjecture. Nature itself away from us and not us may be unnatural for all we know to the contrary. For man himself is only a phenomenon, and he alone makes nature which exists not without him. All the foregoing is the groundwork of the arguments of the deep Buddhists in regard to the real nature of things. Not. The result of all these sound and only possible philosophical conclusions is that there is nothing left for man but entire submission, entire subjection to the unknown power, the humbleness of the unknowing child. And herein we see the force of that dictum of the Savior. Unless ye become as one of these, ye shall in no wise see the kingdom of God. Certainly we are unable to know absolutely that we ourselves exist. By a side glance, as it were, we can suspect whether life itself be only a grand dream, which may be or be not, be anything or be nothing. Hume, in demonstrating that in reality there is no connection between cause and effect, proved that there is some delusion between cause and effect, and therefore that life may be dream. Benedictus Spinoza, in his merciless logic, although he was a man so interpenetrated with the idea of deity as to be called a God-intoxicated man, proved that God must be matter, in evaporating or exhausting, or calculating him the closest out of his own works. So much for the audacity of mind, mind which is knowledge, knowledge which is the devil which is the denier. Our highest knowledge, the most refined sum up of the thinnest sifted metaphysics, is peremptorily passed back upon us when we essay beyond the frontier of second causes. All is guess over that brink. All is cloud where this pathway turn, which way we will ends. Man's human arms are insufficient to lift as weights aught than second causes, caused causes. He falls asleep, helpless, when the great veil is dropped over him to insulate his understanding. All is possible in sleep, because dreams are in sleep. God is in sleep, and God who is in sleep, although he is a reality away from us, is a delusion when sought to. There is no such thing as pain or pleasure radically, without a medium which makes it pain or pleasure. And both are only disturbance, made pain or pleasure from without. Our pain may be pleasure in another differently. constituted nervous method existence. Our pleasures may be pains elsewhere. This possibility, which is the foundation of supernaturalism or of the doctrine of the intelligent population of the elements, proves that pain and pleasure, and the countless shades between them, necessitate the idea of body or of capacity of some kind or other, because capacity is state, and state is material. So says Paracelsus, so says Van Helmont, so says Jacob Boehme. Nothing can be anything unless it is fixed in something material. Digitized by Google, be demonstrated to us. And sleep, which is men's thoughts, or rather the dreams are that are in his, is the stumbling block over which the whole comprehensible theory of man parts into nothing and falls into absurdity, as in which dream he is himself alone, perhaps, made. These general ideas of the profound constitute the mythos of the Gnostics and the Maya, or annihilation, of the Buddhists, however defectively interpreted heretofore, where these sublime subjects have not been wholly misunderstood or thought absurd. Firstly, in the affairs of God Almighty and the world, there is some mighty reason ab extra, which contradicts itself, inasmuch as it contradicts reason, having no reason. But because it contradicts reason, it proves itself to have a reason. Divine, and above reason, which is human, that is, intelligible only. It follows from this, logically, that in being unintelligible, it is master of the intelligible. Therefore, miracle is superior to reality, because miracle is true, and reality is untrue, being possible and therefore limited. Reality is satisfied, and complete, and full, so to speak. While the impossible, and therefore the supernatural, must be true, because it encloses nature, which is only intelligible up to its certain point of nature. Nature itself being yet to be accounted for, inasmuch as nature is not reasonable. What is truth? There is no truth, inasmuch as nature itself, which must necessarily be the basis of everything, is not true truth, but only apparent truth. Secondly, so long as nature must have a farther, or a whereto beyond the present apparent whole, it may be reasonable, that is, all of truth apparent, but it cannot be true truth or abstract positive truth. Man is made, man is not a maker. In other words, man gets nothing that is outside of him. He only obtains that which is already in him. He is in his world. He is of his world. But he is not of another world. His helplessness, unsupported, is perfectly ridiculous. He only lives forgetting himself. He falls asleep blindly into his morrow. Now, in regard of real truth, it has been settled for very many ages that there is no possibility of there ever being such. Cogito ergo sum. I am because I am. Existent only to the periphery of consciousness, no more. Thirdly, for there is something in the ring outside which makes the center, or in other words, that creates consciousness. That which insulates is greater than that which it insulates. Power is only escape, rest, the living out of the dead. Fourthly, thus impossibility alone makes possibility possible. Fifthly, the made cannot know its maker, otherwise it would be its maker itself. For the maker knows that which it makes up to the farthest possible limit of its making or prolongation. Every man's morrow is already passed to the superior intelligence that is altogether independent of morrows, that is, ordinary morrows. The angels have their manacles on the wrists of the men movers. Men think they act their own intentions, but in reality, they act other agents' intentions. In this delusion perhaps lies the reconcilement of that unresolvable puzzle by man, at least in his waking or real state, free will and necessity. Free will is necessity upwards, while necessity is free will downwards, or mutual reversal of the ends of the same lever God's intentions. This is as far as man is concerned, for fate is fate as regards the universal frame of things, the human reason being capable of grasping no possibility otherwise. If he had independent power, he would not do this. He would know his morrow, chapter the 30 to 4th, the pre-Adamites, profound Kabbalistic or Rosicrucian speculations. He monastic or separate state, where nature is ignored and its suggestions and the indulgence of the seductive individual appetite is. Spiritual aims. We held to be ruinous is a dangerous, nay, almost an impossible abnegation. From the spirit side, in this respect, nature is held abominable. Its practice is the shutting of the heavenly door. Thus fleshly incitements are awful, and yet, such are the contradictions of nature, they are necessitated. We must whip the body, as it were, into wood before we can drive the devil therefrom. Must fast and watch and fast. We must reduce our robustness into leanness. Our physical, graceful, worthy or handsome selves we must punish down into everything that is incapable and pitiable. We must become pitiless in our body's own maceration and mortification. Meanwhile, we grow into holiness. Intensifying into saint, the lights of the soul are to shine through the rents and fractures of the flagellated and punished body, until the fleshly sense or enchantment and enticement is trampled up, through the destruction of its medium, into life other than this life. Hood, and they're out. But truly, in this view, the necessities, or rather the requirements of nature cannot be set at naught, cannot be contended with. Religion evades this question. Men suffer to a very grievous extent, to descend to realities in this living world of flesh of ours. Farther, however, in natural arrangements. The most cruel nervous disorders, such as the furor uterinus, hysteric spasms, and a whole train of vengeful mischiefs, chiefly attack such women as have throughout life refused the pleasures of love. Many fatal affections, such as mania, epilepsy, and so on, prey upon those of both sexes who have imposed upon themselves too severe refraining or bridling. This incidence is ingrained in nature, but the dangers resulting from the abuse of these amiable pleasures are much more formidable. pp. 38-39 of Curiositates Erotica Physiologia. Woman's physical constitution adapts her for love. She is rigid, and to a certain extent insensate and even rebelliously irresponsive, all the pittoresques to the number of 12 invented by the Greek courtesan Cyrene as being the best in which to signalize that particular loving mystery, which has everything under it. All those enchanting modes of sympathy which Philirus and Aeschines published, which Eliphas composed in leonine verse, and which afterwards the Roman Emperor Nero caused to be painted on the walls of the imperial banqueting hall in his famous golden palace by the first artists of Rome, all these prove that women are much better adepts in the ars amandi and its mysteries than men, that they have a much keener relish for its intricacies to which they deliver themselves. Up with the chosen object, with a delight and abandon unknown to man. In short, in all the solicitation of love, women are the most inventive, assiduous, intense, and persevering. Catherine, the second of Russia, possessed boundless power. She set no limits to her gratification in the sensual respect. She was imperial and magnificent in her luxurious enormities. Her will was law. She was the modern Messalina. She richly earned the title which was accorded to her of literally being la più futtatrice nel mondo. But, on the other hand, there were wonderful contradictions to this state of irregular eagerness. Maria Coronel, wife of Juan de la Cerda, not being able to bear the absence of her husband, preferred committing suicide to yielding to the otherwise irresistible temptations of the flesh, as she found them in their occasional assaults. The extraordinary unconsciousness and ignorance of some women is remarkable, however rare, especially in these, in some respects, scarcely modest, all-knowing times. Isabella Gonzaga, the wife of the Duke of Urbino, passed 2 years with her husband still remaining a virgin, and so great was her ignorance of the matrimonial usage that, until enlightened, she had imagined all married women lived as she lived, and she received the new knowledge in all simplicity. Greek pictorial and statuary art was suffused with ideas of matchless and of immortal beauty. The curves and undulation of form, the enchanting and enchanted art which peopled Grecian landscapes with shapes of ravishment and Greek temples with wonders. The eye that saw, the hand that traced, the taste that toned, the delicacy that softened, all was exquisite. All was successful. The most intensely poetical and subduing, and the most gloriously beautiful object in the whole universe is the undraped form of a woman symmetrical. No wonder that the ancients made a woman an object of idolatry. In the excess, in the super-excelling of their refinement, other ideals were reached. Plus the sexes were too, but beauty, difficult to understand, but true. The reason may be sorrow that such a glorious object, divinity's handiwork, as a present to man, should perish. Reflect upon note immediately following. 66. Plus beauty became bifurcated and irregular, heated as it were into a sinister, a devilish temptation for passion of taste. Excess, or a deviating superflux or overdoing, of desire supervened. Longing became delirious, because Lucifer, or the lost one, yet unchastened presumption, he had passed his lightning-like availing spear of apotheosizing enchanted tempting death through the transmuted human female body, advanced and addressed in its snaring graces to hell's perfectness. Was 1. Beards have naught of beauty, apart from strength. Beards are barbarous, hence their name. Hair is of the beasts, excrementa, tentacula. The Greek artists exercised their talents in the production of a kind of beauty mixed of that of the two sexes, merging and blending the softness and enchanting shapeliness of the one with the aggressive, picturesque roundness and boldness of the other. Each was the acme of picture-like propriety and grace. But the third thing was a new thing, otherwise a miracle, a new sensation. Hence Paris, hence Adonis, hence Ganymede, hence the loves of Salmacis and Hermaphroditus, hence the feminine Bacchus, hence Hylas. Hence these deities, intresses of neither sex, and yet of both. Greek art in this respect presents a phenomenon, As a phenomenon, we must recognize and regard it. The flower is supernatural, treasonous, and abhorrent. It is a flower of hell. Nevertheless, it is a flower. And thus the idea dominates the alternate shaded and shining halves of the whole world, of all art, of all philosophy, of all religion. Philosophy must not ignore or affect not to see, or decline hypocritically or too nicely to consider these all-powerful factors. This whole round of subjects intimately refers to the Rosicrucians and to their supposed unintelligible beliefs. They are intelligible enough to the knowing ones, but they are not to be divulged. The most difficult problem of the Greek artists was to exercise their talent in the production of a kind of beauty mixed with that of the two sexes, and time has spared some of the masterpieces. Such is the figure known under the name of the hermaphrodite. In the classic times, both amongst the Greeks and Romans as also in Oriental countries, a cruel and flagitious violation of nature produced this beauty by enforcing sacrifice of a peculiar kind on young male victims. In the case of true hermaphroditism, that which art could only effect by 1. Dispossession, nature brings about by superaddition, or rather by concurrent transformation or mutual coincidence. The idea even lies perdu in the supposed origin of mankind. The most extraordinary ideas as to the origin of the human race have been entertained by speculative thinkers and by theologians. The celebrated William Law believed that the first human being was a creature combining the characteristics of both sexes in his own individual person. God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Some controversionists consider that there is a long space due between the foregoing and the succeeding. Male and female created he them. Increase and multiply and replenish the earth. This command was given on the 6th day. Eve was not created until the 7th day. Hence Eve must have been born of Adam or separated from him. Admitting, moreover, that the term day, as used in Genesis, is employed to express an indefinite period of time, in order to form woman, God deprived Adam of his androgyne character and reduced him to a being having one sex only. And here steps in a fanciful idea of some speculative thinkers, which is very poetical and beautiful. They ask in specifying the question, in serious truth, a not altogether improbable conjecture, whether the irresistible inclination and the otherwise mysterious, unaccountable drawing together, and sympathy of two persons who meet for the first time and find themselves mutually charmed, or who even. Marcianus Capella lib. I. Hear or read of each other, whether even the continual natural inclination which impels man to woman and woman to man, be not the spirit reflex and the atoning penance of the original grand human division, and that this extra natural inclination which draws one sex towards the other be not the movements of fate, and that the whole is the active tendency and forced searching through the world for the missed and lost half, to once more embrace and supernaturally enrapture in the recognition to become one again. Hence, perhaps, that inconstancy and feebleness of decision and puzzled distress, so aboundingly manifest in human nature, becoming dramatic in 1,000 ways in the confusions of history, a stupendous scheme of contradictions itself. May such affinities and such unsuspected enchantment in this hard, practical, disbelieving world lie mysteriously deep as the eternal secret of original human fellowship and society. And may even the amusement and the wonder of uninterested spectators and standers by arise only from their having the unimagined fact of dream and magic being presented, while this unaccountable show is the secret foundation of all the sentimental phenomena of the world. In all the infinite gradations of love and passion and sympathy, we may be witnessing the baffled attempts of the whole round of human nature, of the succession of the generations and the centuries. Life being hopelessly too short, and circumstances controlling everything, we may be seeing the efforts of the halves to recover each other. The masculine half of mankind wandering unconsciously to find its fellow feminine, and the female half of the human family urging with the still more lively and more sensitive, and more acutely the Rosicrucians, appointed at repeated failure, quest, each sex in its half individuality and prosecuting through time its melancholy penance, straining blindly towards that shadow, the complement and double of itself. Vain indeed in the nature of things must be that human search to find in this world the supernaturally divorced half. For that other half-self originated in another world, and thence started on a dream pilgrimage as a shadow or spirit recognizable only through the imagination of a real person to recover its other original half in this world. We doubt, indeed, whether in this world that in this state of flesh the discovery would be welcome, even were discovery and recovery possible. Such is the preordainment of fate, that the halves of this first junction may wander all the world over and exhaust the generations and all time in the search, and yet never meet, save at that grand assize, or general resurrection, where impend the new heaven and the new earth, and at which final consummation the two parts of the same unit might be united, never to be sundered, more complete and summed as the one being, sexless, in the bosom of divinity, where there is neither marriage nor giving in marriage. The idea that Adam and Eve were both originally hermaphrodites was revived in the 13th century by Amaury de Chartres. He held among other fanciful notions that at the end of the world, both sexes should be reunited in the same person. Some learned rabbis asserted that Adam was created double, that is, with two bodies, one male and the other female, joined together by the shoulders, their heads looking in opposite directions. And that, when God created Eve, he only divided such body in two. Others maintained that Adam and Eve were each of them, separately, an hermaphrodite. Other Jewish authorities, among whom are Samuel Manasseh and Ben Israel, are of opinion that our great progenitor was created with two bodies, and that he separated them afterwards during Adam's sleep, an opinion founded by these writers upon the 2nd chapter of Genesis, verse 21, the literal translation of the Hebrew being. He separated the woman from his side, and substituted flesh in her place. This idea resembles that of Plato. Origen, St. Chrysostom, and St. Thomas believed that the woman was not created till the 7th day. But the most generally received opinion is that Adam and Eve were created on the 6th. These particular notions, extravagant as they must be admitted to be as to the original single characteristics of Adam and Eve, are eminently Platonic, nay Kabbalistic. Plato proceeds to account for the love which some men have for some women, and vice versa. The males, he says, which are halves of an androgyne, are much given to women, and the women, which are the halves of an androgyne, are passionately fond of men. As for the women, who indulge in inclination for their own sex, they are the halves of the androgyne females who were doubled, and the men who exhibit a liking for other men are the halves of the males who were also doubled. In the beginning, there were 3 kinds of human beings, not only the 2 which still exist, but a third, which was composed of the 2 first. Of this last sex or kind, nothing remains but the tradition and the name. The androgynes, for so they were called, had not only both the male and female faces, but also possessed the sexual distinctions of both. Of these creatures, likewise, nothing now exists but the name, which survives as a stigma, and which is considered infamous. The reason assigned for the different shape of these 3 kinds was that the males. Nature has made this the fact as out of nature, digitized by Google, were formed by the sun, the females by the earth, and the mixed race of androgynes by the moon, which partakes both of the sun and the earth. Ecclesiastical writers declare that such an eunuch was the holy evangelist, St. John, whom Jesus loved beyond all his other disciples, who lay upon Jesus' bosom, who, while Peter tardily advanced, flew, borne on the wings of virginity, to the Lord, and penetrating into the secrets of the divine nativity, was emboldened to declare what preceding ages had been ignorant of. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Reynardi Opera, Vol. 7, p. 252. If the disciples of the doctrine of evolution, or selection of the fittest, are right, if your Darwins, your Huxleys, your Herbert Spencers, your Lewis, your dense, unimaginative men are correct in their deductions of correlation, bowing out God, as it were, exterior of his own creation, then reverence and devotion and martyrdom and the sacredness and the magic of virginity must be the merest ludicrous superstition and figment. Is man alone in his world? Are there others in it with him? The ancients universally held virginity as a real magic, transcendental, mysterious something, which exercised power supernaturally both through heaven and through earth. It was an unnatural, natural outspring set apart and sacred of the gods. None but the barbarous touch, the brutal touch, could profane it. It worked miracles. 'Tis said that the lion will turn and flee from a maid in the pride of her purity. For maidhood and virginity is a phenomenon independent of creation, and bears through the worlds visible and invisible the worlds immortal, the impress and seal upon its forehead of God's rest, not of his activity. Hence its sacredness in all religions and under all beliefs. Voilà pourquoi, pendant les persécutions, il y eut tant de vierges chrétiennes outragées par leurs bourreaux qui ne faisaient bowing out, or 66 complimenting out, to express in a strong figure, but not inapt.
Appliquer l'antique loi romaine, en vertu de laquelle une vierge ne pouvait pas être mise à mort. Antiquité la plus reculée jusqu'à nos jours, par Pierre Dufour, vol. 3, Chap. I. p. 29. Bruxelles, Girozet, 1861. Les juges païens qui prenaient un odieux plaisir à les frapper dans ce qu'elles avaient de plus cher. Mais leur virginité était un sacrifice qu'elles offraient chastement à Dieu, en échange de la couronne du martyre. Une vierge, disait saint Ambroise, plus peut être prostituée et non souillée. Les vierges, dit saint Cyprien, sont comme les fleurs du jardin des ciels.
Pierre Dufour. And when forced, the author might have added, become still more glorious flowers of paradise. Mary Magdalene was the first at the tomb of the Redeemer and was the first to whom our, digitized by Google, Lord showed himself. It was through a woman that our race was rendered possible. This must never be forgotten. It is not difficult to discover how inveterate the belief of their system, which seems so naturally to account for everything, has become to the materialists, who have identified the time that has got into the watch with the reason that the watch goes. Their whole work is the falling in love with and believing their own work. It would be cruel to make these men believe. It would be the dispossession of themselves out of themselves. Their scope and range and judgment are an impenetrable world's presumption, working only from the center outwards as from particulars to generals, the false way. These accepted reasonable reasoners do not see that if God's reasons had been man's reasons, man would never have been, because man has no place in reason, he is not reasonable. It is the self-assertion and the self-presumption that is at fault. Mere miserable self-conceit produces these men. Volubility in reading, provide them with a cloud of words wherewith they may confuse. They have dared in their lofty philosophical climbing, like the men of Babel or Babel, as the tongues afterwards became forcing into their heights of metaphysics to look down upon God, spying him at his work. Impious, mad stupidity, trusting brains in which the devil forges lies, forgetting that darkness is only the reverse side of light, as light is only the presented side of darkness, and that both are the same. We should know no light without darkness, which shows us the light, just in the same way as we see the wrong side of the light in seeing the darkness when the welcome light appears, so to speak. These men want contradiction. They are ruined in their own self-esteem. They are floated upward in the pride of knowledge with wings of wax. They grope in the debris of nature. Their knowledge is scientific knowledge. Knowledge as an acquisition to enlighten is as ashes with the fire all out of it, fire which is faith. These philosophers are converted into the vehicle of the compre. Henshin of their own theories, and there they rest, absorbed and occupied in these alone. Self-centered, complete, satisfied, distrustless, they fortify themselves in their triumph and become incompetent to see aught that shall challenge their own fixed ideas. In regard to these merely scientific people, an apt and a forcible remark has been made. Natural selection can only preserve such slight variations as are immediately useful. It cannot provide a savage with brains suited to the remote needs of his civilized descendants some thousands of years later. All is progressive and all is development with these philosophers. They have no idea of cataclysm. When the whole world is the offspring, when the mountains, with the mutilated and the riven faces which they present to us, are the children thunder-stricken, of the intelligent master, guide, and God of all. Thinkest thou that those skies have forgotten to be in earnest, because thou goest mouthing through the world like an ape? Be what you wish to be then, and go down into the dust. Very probably your fate it may prove to be, though it may be the lot of some others to escape. By humbleness, by faith. Revelation and supernatural disclosure, quite different to progress and circumstantial natural advance, as the nature of nature, are to be inferred from the apparition of certain deplorable maladies, diseases which puzzle and bewilder as to their true character, which lead us astray sometimes as to their likeliest best treatment. The ideas of the Rosicrucians as to the real origin of these diseases, which seem, large as is the catalogue of maladies, so contrary to all the physiological, natural groundwork upon which man's health and healthy exercise of his nature expand and expound, are speculative and recherche in the extreme. Such querists ask in vain where such diseases, so momentous, so super horrid, could have first sprung. Philosophers of this class affirm that there is nothing of these in the true character of man, that these diseases stand aloof and are of themselves, that they bear in themselves proofs of the indignation exterior to man, to some violent invasion and inversion, to some inappeasable outrage of God's law. Flesh and blood has become an accursed, a super-accursed weed, from the devils having gained access to it. Man's unholy passions have hurried him into an abyss of physical perdition, wherein he has obliterated his image and gifts, and done things beyond the laws of his impress, wide already as the area of the exercise of those laws was, even for evil. The penalty has pursued the original guilt through the generations, and still survives, because man has dared to intrude into the disorders of darkness, and brought back out of Orcus, and made physical guilt and horror, which were the property of the devils and within the compass of their range, alone, of accursed activity, but which were not for him, were not naturally for him. Hence the marks and tokens of this supernatural cancer, some of the imported effects, otherwise lying out of his reach as being far above what his limited nature could endure without utter consumption of itself of the first fall. Conquest is widespread just according to the weakness and incidence of the subjected. Fire finds its easy prey in dry leaves and in light combustible. These mortal diseases spread and ramify with an extension and with a vigor just in the proportion of the necessitated surrender arising from the incompetency and inability to resist. These hitherto supersensual and supernatural terrors had found an access into this real world of body, and there the disaster reveled in its appropriate forms in its newly found dominion. The imagination of man is evil continually. There are blots and imperfections which have fastened upon man's very mortal composition or body. His nature is struggling to free itself of the contagion. But the poison is not poison of this world. The generations suffer in all the crowd forward, in all their procession and replication for the unbelievable sin, for the wanton out-of-the-way wickedness of predecessors. This is the theory as to the origin of certain diseases which are considered not human, but which have been conveyed to and are inherited by those who have no affinity with these inflictions by their nature or by the intentions of the exterior providence. Man has brought all this upon himself, as farther fruits and newer penalties arising from the first great lapse and in farther proof, in still more degrading and still more disfiguring decadence of the imbibing of the first sweet poison, so deliciously and yet so treacherously brewed by the first great tempter, nameless anonymous, with its Janus mask, and offering to that phenomenon, man, 66, under its many names. Man is another ruin, perhaps, in a series of several previous ruins, of which mortality has lost all trace. The terms superstition and science are counterchanged. In reality, science may be the superstition, and superstition the truth. Scientific men are the most superstitious of any class, for they have raised an idol which they call science, and therefore truth, and they have fallen down and worshipped science as God. They have taken themselves out of themselves and worshipped themselves, otherwise their heads instead of their hearts, their reason, which is no reason really, instead of their hearts, or their emotions and instincts, which are true and which are infallible, because they contradict the apparent and the reasonable, which is never true. Hence we cannot know God through God, or rather through the intellect, but we must know God through the Savior, or through the heart or affections, which entity or sum of heart and affections is second God, or man, in the image. And C, the third person of the Trinity is the Holy Ghost, or recognition, in which both are seen in the Spirit, wherein, and absorbing the two others, is interfluent, miraculous, instant union and assumption of God and means in belief. This is the groundwork of all religious systems. God's anger is shown in those. Immortal, or spirit, cancers, imported as adaptations to the nature of physical man, into body corporate, the supernatural become natural.
Enfin, un des plus grands hommes qui ait porté le flambeau dans les ténèbres de l'art médical, en chirurgie. Laverrolle, dit-il avec cette conviction que la génie peut seule donner, a pris son origine dans le commerce impur d'un Français lépreux avec une courtisane qui avait des bubons vénériens, laquelle infecta ensuite tous ceux qui eurent affaire à elle. C'est ainsi, continue cet habile et audacieux observateur, c'est ainsi que Laverrolle provenu de la lèpre et des bubons vénériens. À peu près comme la race des mulets sortie de l'accouplement d'un cheval et d'une ânesse se répandit par contagion dans tout l'univers. Paracelse considérait donc le vérole de 1494 comme un genre nouveau dans l'antique famille des maladies vénériennes. Pierre Dufour, tome 4e, p. 292. Un saint laïc, dit Jean-Baptiste Van Helmont dans son Tumulus Pestis, tâchant de deviner pourquoi la vérole avait paru au siècle passé et non auparavant, fut ravi en esprit et eut une vision d'une jument rongée du farcin, d'où il soupçonna qu'au siège de Naples, où cette maladie parut pour la première fois, quelque homme avait eu un commerce abominable avec une bête de cette espèce attaquée du même mal, et qu'ensuite, par un effet de la justice divine, il avait malheureusement infecté le genre humain.
Pierre Dufour, tome 4e, chap, XX, p. 292, 66, Menardi, Matthieu, Brassavola, et Paracelse disant que l'infection vénérienne est née de la lèpre et de la prostitution. Pierre Dufour, tome 4e, p. 297. Nothing can exceed the importance of the foregoing observations in regard to the welfare of man, especially in these questioning, inquisitive modern times, when everything is brought to the front and remorselessly canvassed. Such names as the great Paracelsus, the prince of chemists and physiologists, and that of Van Helmont, the most subtle and profound of magnetists and psychologists, secure attention among the best informed and carry their own consummate guarantee, the most convincingly to the adepts. Men of reflection are needed to comprehend these theories and speculations, and to weigh this evidence. Digitized by Google, Schnuffis. Gnostic Talisman. Why? Chapter the 35th. In the adapted Rosicrucian contemplation, Trusion of sin, ruins of the old worlds, the extraordinary philosophy of the Rosicrucians is best explained.
Through the following charges which were brought forward to the disparagement of these famous men. Petrigascendi, Theologia Epistolica, Exercitatio, in qua Principia Philosophiae, Roberti Fludi, Medici Rediguntur. Parisis, apud Sebastianum Chronosi, via Jacobea subsiconis, MD Prima, tutam scripturam secrum, referiat alchemiam, et principia alchemistica, sensum scripturi mysticum non esse alium, quam.
In the first place, the whole of the sacred scriptures are a grand mystical puzzle referring to alchemy, and to the universal alchemic process. The mystical sense of the Old and the New Testaments is none other than the history of alchemy originated in the Kabbalah, and the rationale of that called the philosopher's stone. It matters not to the question of these secrets fixed what religions be professed, whether Christian, whether those of these sects, whether infidel and heathen. That only is Catholic which lies in the stone, otherwise practical magic, whereby demons are commanded, good spirits evoked, and the innermost hidden resources of nature, and the spirits of nature laid bare and availed of. Secondly, when deity is said to be light, pervading and vivifying all nature, he enters not in anything unless a mask of the object is adopted as the medium in which he fixes. This aura is the infinite ethereal spirit. The spring or the moving spirits or the means of alchemy evolve out of it. They are fivefold in their exercise or delimitation. God is indeed identical with this supreme spirit. And the radiant or intense material nucleus is the lucid conflux spot or the sun, stored with vigor, sensitiveness, and intelligence. From this intense center or fiery blaze of power, agitations in life vibrate in masterdom from the middle point to circumference. God, thus, in producing, is said to be identified with matter, and he so fills that there are not secondary causes except to man, who can only know second causes. This, be it noted, is Berkeleyism on the one side, and its opposite, or Spinozism, on the other, both being the same thing in reality, looked at from either side, or from before and from behind. Thirdly, composed of this mask and of this infinite medium or divine movement is the general investment called the soul of the world. The purer part of this sensitive, responsive soul is, in its own nature, of the breath of the angels. For the angels were made. The anima mundi is the flaming spiritual region, in which all things live. Even the devils are portions of this efflux, which is the general life, but the rebellious spirits of matter, dense, contradictory, inaccessible, are buried or lost, and were afterwards chained in inapprehensive matter. All particular sentiences, whether of the brutes or man, are nothing other than parts of the whole lucid spirit. Of the same soul is the archangel Michael, or Metatron. Also all the angels in their sevenfold regions, both of the bad and of the good, of the dexter and of the sinister sides of creation. Fourthly, which is still more dreadful, the same anima mundi, or soul of the world, is the real Mesa. Saya, Savior, Christ, the cornerstone of the temple itself, the stone, or rock, upon which the church and salvation is founded. This is the mystical end and scope of that longed-for beatitude, or magical transfiguration, the philosopher's stone, or foundation, which when contracted into itself and concentrated and intensified, glows into flaming red, or possession, or glorified agony. From thence it is said to be the blood of Christ, which blood was shed for the redemption of the world from the penalties of the fall. By means of the great sacrifice, mortality is purged into purity back into the celestial fire, and redeemed from hell or matter. However, we are not redeemed by the blood of human Christ, but by the atoning blood in a divine and mystical sense. Fifthly, the just man made perfect is the alchemist who, having found the philosopher's stone, becomes immortal and disappears or dies to the world, his chariot of fire being that of Enoch or translation. To die is simply the falling asunder and disintegration of the Mecca. Fire is contention, whether holy or unholy. Heat, intensified in the struggle, agitates furiously to fire. Fire, triumphing and mastering the matter which lends it its material and strength when passing into victory, brandishes into the calm and the glory of victory, and becomes yellow in its flaming precious gold, and quiet light intense as the grandest phenomenon sprung up skywards or against gravity, therefore reversing nature's principal law. The intenser the darkness, or the mass of matter, the greater the light, and the greater the spirit, and vivacity and force in the liberation into light of the darkness and the matter, when its farthest winnowed atoms are forced asunder in the darts of the fire, and turned inside outwards. See pages 337, 338, 339. This is the Holy Grail, or Sangreal, or Sangreale, or fire, or mighty redeeming magic, sought by the champions or the knights of King Arthur's Round Table. See supplementary note P. 368, the Round Table of King Arthur, from the original preserved in the courthouse of the castle at Winchester, Sangreal, or Holy Grail. 13 lunations. Lunations, 2 equal to dark, mysterious Tau, Tradition that Judas Iscariot left the table at the words of the Savior, "What thou doest, do quickly," and had no portion in the last rite. AI St. Matthew, CEFG 7th St. Philip, B 2nd St. James, 3rd St. Simon, D 5th St. James, 4th St. Peter, H 8th St. Lebuse, IJ 10th St. Thomas, K 9th St. Andrew, 11th vacant, 6th St. Bartholomew, L 12th St. John. After the SOP, Satan entered into him. Then said Jesus unto him, "That thou doest, do quickly." No man at the table knew for what intent he spake this unto him. Now, he, then having received the SOP, went immediately out. And it was night. John, chap. the 30, verse 27-28, 30. Nism of the senses, which have contracted inwards and formed the prison of the soul, a prison of pains and penalties, from between the bars of the windows of which the suffering, languishing spirit looks for the often long, coming, releasing great spirit death. To rise is to cast off the chains of mortality. To become glorified is to discover in one's own identity the glorious godlike gifts or magic, which are the wings, upon which to rise. Those men who have passed in their lifetime from the hither side to the thither side, or the world invisible following into the light the divine, beckoned to paradise of the angels of light, are the brothers of the Rosy Cross, or the Rosicrucians, as they have been called, who know everything, can do anything, and have even arrogated to themselves, when in them should be set up the same angelical magical spirit which was in the Christ Jesus, to be of the counsel of God, though in the world they were the humblest of the servants of the Almighty. In the 6th place, creation is not the making of things out of nothing, which we understand commonly of God's work in the beginning of the universe or of creation. Matter, which the Rosicrucians frequently refer to as darkness, is that only which is properly to be called nothing. Thus, when God is said to create or make something out of nothing, it is to be understood that he worked with material or with darkness, which is the blank side or the other side of light turned away. These profound metaphysical distinctions are the key of all the theologies. Moses, when he describes the creation of the world, is the alchemist, relating in parable the generation of the solids and the flowing over into the border, country of the invisible, where everything ultimately is. The history of David, Solomon, Jacob, Job, the accounts of the heroes of the stories of the Apocrypha, the most concealed, or the flitting of the flickering flame out of the urn, recondite of the things hidden, thence its name, and see, are Kabbalistic and alchemical, similarly to all the mythologies, which are, in their fanciful and mystic range of supposed facts, Kabbalistic and alchemical. The true Kabbalista are none other than alchemists and Rosicrucians. Likewise the Magi, wise men, philosophers, priests, and heroes, from Jason and the Three Kings to King Arthur, and from Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Moses to Numa, Paracelsus, Borrichius, Robertus de Fluctibus, and others. The Rosicrucian system took the following forms. These philosophers believed that there were two principles in the beginning, light and darkness, or form, and the material out of which the form was. That before the creation, the light itself was as divinity latent or at rest. In the creation, or in the production of things, divinity became active, aroused, and inventive. By whatever name distinguished, or by whatever style identified, Moses' description of creation is to be taken as the process of alchemy, as worked by nature itself, being her form, to which head are referred the kingdoms of darkness, or chaos, and the light emerging out of its own bosom, or darkness. After the active movement from the center, or evolvement, or creation, the radiation and counterworking or interchange of light and darkness in crossing and encountering irritated mutually, naturally, became expansive and contractive angularly, thence pyramidal and starry. And in the relative counterbalancing contemplation, the diversity of things arose at the points of the masterdom into form or light, the medium in which the elements were now grew in their natures. From these various rudiments of being, the archetypical scheme arranged itself, which, one, in essence, was triple, in procession or parade. Hence the Trinity. From the Trinity and the 66 vivifying substratum in the mathematical four corners of the world comes the ineffable name, Tetragrammaton. The archetypical idea is also called reflective, intelligible, informed, superessential, endless in resource. The reflection of God is in the archetype, which is the second principle, or macrocosmos, exhibiting either sides or will in action. This is displayed in three divisions or spheres, called the empyreum, then the ethereum, the elements. Light emanates in the Sephiroth or sevenfold rotation, hence the production of phenomena. In uniting with the ethereal spirit, it becomes the soul, or responsive sentience of the world, The further elucidation of the Rosicrucian theological system in its general features, so far as in hint or parable submitted to unenlightened comprehension, will be found pre-stated at page 208 and elsewhere. The Rosicrucians contend that music or melody, which is enchantment, pervades all nature in its prosperous or intended progress, although it is only the wail or plaint of the instinctive soul on its wounded or sacrificed or ruined side. It mourns for its original lost paradise. The music of the spheres is no unreal thing, but real as is the atmosphere of the spirits, for music is the atmosphere of the spirits, and discords are a medium for the coarse and low spirits, who inundate, as it were, the lees and the settlings of nature. In discords or in the inharmonious strife amidst the sounds, the rabble of the spirits are stimulated to their envious and spiteful, or malefic or freakish and blundering bad life. Beauty is not, however, necessarily beauty. It may be seduction. For the higher grades of the recusant or rebellious spirits who find their power in the original permission that there might be phenomena, are beautiful in their assumption or usurpation of the lovely forms of spirit life and of nature. And they will prevail, sometimes even God saw himself. But Christ is not God, any more than the glass is the seer. Object, subject, result, or the three persons of the Trinity. Digitized by Google. Against the best efforts of the angels of light. The Kabbalists whisper that God made the world by the means of music, that music, as man knows music, is essentially a power, that it is the faint, much changed, much enfeebled soul relic and tradition, and reminder of man's lost paradise, that everything was possible, as the gift of God, which explains the classic fables of Orpheus, Amphion, and the mythological wonder-workers in music, that music is modulated in the movements of the planets according to the rearrangement of the post-diluvian world, and in conformity with the readjustment of the solar system after mysterious aberration or cataclysm. That mortality cannot hear, and that the human soul is so debased that it only catches intermittently the faint echo of the continuous universal music which, in other, now material senses, is the life and growth and splendor of everything. Music is magic, is sacred, and a power, as all harmony must be, the nerves of the world, the aspiration of living things, the spell which breaks up and extols into superadded supernatural life, the real into the ideal. Harmony, or the mysterious, solace and satisfaction and happiness at heroism which we feel, is found in the beauty of the human figure, the glories and graces of all growing objects in moving or unmoving natures. Success in nature and in life with their changes as man knows nature and life arise from the interstarry mechanical modifications and the incidents through the restless movement of the planets. All the glorious seeming mechanism of the starry sky shows so as mechanism only to the measuring senses of man, but in reality it may be the play of infinite spirit. The planets of our own system may be directed in their continual speaking changes by their several crowds of governing spirits. Spirits being there's not the smallest orb that thou beholdst, but in his motion like an angel sings, still choiring to the young-eyed cherubims. Such harmony is in immortal souls, but whilst this muddy vesture of decay doth grossly close it in, we cannot hear it. Fig.io ad CVM. Chart A. Kabbalistic, Astrological, and Astronomical, Chaldaic Mysteries, NB, the references to Noah's, and chapters are to those corresponding in very ancient Rosicrucian tracts or charts. Digitized by Google, chart B. Fig 9, ad CV $26, Kabbalistic, Natural, Supernatural, Light, Dark, Dark, Light, NB, the references to Noah's, and chapters are to those corresponding in very ancient Rosicrucian tracts or charts. Digitized by Google, iChart, see Kabbalistic production of the worlds visible, generation of the microcosmos, NB, the references to Nos, and chapters are to those corresponding in very ancient Rosicrucian tracts or charts. Digitized by Google UN, digitized by Google. 1. Where the directors of matter, its solids are only to be separated by soul or energy, as the wedge cleaves inert or resistant solids. Music is always in the air. Man has no ears for it, unless it is enlivened to, or finds access to, his senses. But his heart is its home, if he has a heart and not an animal's mechanic throbbing machine only. Air is the breathing of nature. Music is always in the air, more particularly at night, for nature is necessarily more nervously sensitive at night, whether for the beautiful or the dreadful, because both are equally exciting and fascinating. Basilisks, both as they are mysterious. We obtain by pulsation, or scientific commotion of the air, by musical instruments, the music out of it, and our fine nerves are the fine sensitives, as the harp played upon to receive it. Otherwise there is no sense in music, otherwise our passions could not be stirred by it. These are storms and convulsions certainly not born of God's original rest. Rather, they come of the stirring ambitions of Lucifer, uprising son of the morning, son of the awakening, a son of the sun. Music and its success depend upon the prosperous progress of the planets which make it, as they prearrange, order, and fix the fates of men. It is no inconsistent thing to say that, in the Rosicrucian sense, every stone, flower, and tree has its horoscope, as inspired by the great soul of the world, which is all continual changing purpose, urging restlessly towards rest, or back again to that from which it came. Moving in the arc of the pendulum, between the 2 points life and death, beyond which the swing of this world's creation to points cannot pass or be.
Nullam esse herbam, aut plantem inferius, cuius nansit stella in firmamento, que impercuciat, it dicat ai, cresce. Exercitatio in Flidinum Philosophiam, p. 228.
Parisius, 1630. 1 chapter the 36th. Indian mysterious adoration of forms. The unity of the mythologies found in the Buddhistic and Mohammedan temples. General note on the Sakti Puja. Power means the good goddess Maya. She is also called Bagala, Vagula, Bagalan She has neither images nor pictures. The girl. In the Indian sacred secret temple rites, who figures as the representative of Sakti, is the supposed embodiment of the goddess offered for worship. The word Sakti corresponds to genius or sylph of the Rosicrucian creed. The doctrine of guardian angels and of patron saints is conveyed in these Hindu meanings in the machinery of the sylphs. During puja, the yogini is supposed to be in an exalted visionary state, wherein, like the sibyls among the ancients and the modern clairvoyantes, she answers questions in a delirious manner and is supposed to be, for the time, inspired.
Foreign Quarterly Review, No. X, for February, Dixuet Cent. Trente, Art. 7. Histoire critique du gnosticisme et de son influence sur les sectes religieuses et philosophiques des 6 premiers siècles de Père chrétienne. Ouvrage couronné par l'Académie royale des inscriptions et belles-lettres par M. J. Matter, professeur. 2 tomes, avec planches, Huet-Vio, Paris, 1828.
The third volume is of small size and contains 11 plates of gems and symbols. This book proves Gnosticism to be identical with the Sakti creed of the Hindus. Brahm Atma, the breathing soul, is, according to the Hindus, a spiritual supreme being, coeval with the formation of the world. In process of time, the Hindus appear to have adopted a material type or emblem of Brahm. A rude block of stone began to be set up. This was the phallus, or as they termed it, the linga. This emblem had reference to the procreative power seen throughout nature, and in that primeval age was regarded with the greatest awe and veneration. This simple and primitive idolatry came by degrees to diverge into the adoration of the elements, particularly fire, and at length developed itself by the institution of an emanation from Brahm Atma in his triune capacity, as creator, preserver, and destroyer. These attributes were deified under the names of Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva, on whom were conferred 3 gunas, or qualities, viz., Raja, Sat, and Tamas. This is the Trimurti. Trimurti, 3-formed, Murti, signifying also an image. Our vital souls are, according to the Vedanta, no more than images, or siddha, of the Supreme Spirit. As Res Vol 3, it may be concluded that the most exalted notion of worship among the Hindus is a service of fear. The Brahmins say that the other gods are good and benevolent and will not hurt their creatures, but that Siva is powerful and cruel, and that it is necessary to appease him. As fear is and must be everywhere the most potent feeling. Thence vital and active physical religion, distrust and fear of the external phenomena of the world as meaning mischief to us created religion. Fear creates respect. Respect is attention to an object, and therefore dread of it. We are not acquainted with its possible operation upon ourselves in regard of our being interfered with or injured. Because. Hence all religion is selfishness apart from inspiration, which the world calls superstition. The most popular representation of the divine being in India is unquestionably the linga, a smooth stone rising out of another stone of finer texture, simulacrum membri virili et pudendum mulibre. This emblem is identical with Siva in his capacity of Lord of all. It is necessary, however, to observe that Professor Wilson, while admitting that the linga is perhaps the most ancient object of homage adopted in India, adds subsequently to the ritual of the Vedas, which was chiefly, if not wholly, addressed to the elements, and particularly to fire. How far the worship of the linga is authorized by the Vedas is doubtful, but that it is the main purport of several of the Puranas there can be no doubt. There, the universality of linga puja at the period of the Mohammedan invasion of India is well attested. The idol destroyed by Mahmud of Ghizni was nothing more than one of those mystical blocks of stone called lingas. The worship of Siva under the type of the linga is almost the only form in which that deity is reverenced. the linga of black or white marble, and sometimes of alabaster slightly tinted in gilt, hashtag is placed in the middle of the Hindu temples.
Speaking of Siva and Parvati, M. de Langlais says, les deux divinités dont il s'agit sont très souvent et très pieusement adorées sous la figure du linga n'est pas applicable et de l'Ioni, dans leur mystérieuse conjonction. Ioni se nomme aussi Broga, n'est pas applicable Madhuri, Douce et Arga, vase en forme de bateau.
Benares is the peculiar seat of the linga or phallic worship. No less than 47 lingas are visited, all of preeminent sanctity, but there are hundreds of inferior notes still worshipped, and thousands whose fame and fashion have passed away. It is a singular fact that upon this adoration of the procreative and sexual Sakti seen throughout nature hinges the whole strength of the Hindu faith. Notwithstanding all that has been said by half-informed and prejudiced persons to the contrary, this puja does not appear to be prejudicial to the morals of the people. Nearly all the pujas are conducted with the frequent ringing of bells, and the object of this is twofold. First, to wake up the attention at particular parts of the service, and secondly, to scare away malignant dutas and evil spirits, precisely, in fact, for the same reasons as they are used at the celebration of Mass in Roman Catholic countries. Prakriti, the mother of gods and men, one with matter, the source of error, is identified with Maya or delusion, and coexistent with the omnipotent as his Sakti, his personified energy, his bride. It is stated in one of the Purans that Brahma, having determined to create the universe, became androgynous, male and female, the right half having the sex and form of a man, the left that of a woman. In his images he is sometimes thus represented, and is then termed Ardnari. This is Prakriti of one nature with Brahm illusion, eternal. As the soul, so is its active energy, as the faculty of burning is in fire. The Sakti system bears a striking affinity with Epicureanism. It teaches materialism and the atomic system of the confluence of chance. Compare the Ananda Tantram, c. 16, with Lucretius, lib. 2. According to the immediate object of worship is the particular ceremony, but all the forms require the use of some or all of the 5 makaras, mansa, matsya, digitized by Google. Madhya, Maithuna, and Mudra, that is fish, flesh, wine, women, and certain charms or mystical gesticulations with the fingers. Suitable mantras, or incantations, are also indispensable, according to the end proposed, consisting of various seemingly unmeaning monosyllabic combinations of letters of great imaginary efficacy. In many of the religious observances, solitude is enjoined, but all the principal ceremonics culminate in the worship of Sakti, or power, and require, for that purpose, the presence of a young and beautiful girl, as the living representative of the goddess. This worship is mostly celebrated, in all due serious religious formality, in a mixed society, the men of which represent Bhairavas, or Viras, and the women Panravas and Nayikas. The Sakti is personified by a naked girl to whom offerings. The caste mark of the Saivas and Saktas consist of 3 horizontal, digitized by Google Mysterium, forma exterior agferizione mori, lugdani bata vorum. Right, preadamite. Signs or zodiacal spaces, preadamite. 5. 1593. Anno. Zodiacal spaces, Rosicrucian system. Structure of the Arga, or arc. Also, left are made of meat and wine, which are then distributed amongst the assistants. Here follows the chanting of the mantras and sacred texts, and the performance of the mudra, or gesticulations with the fingers. The whole service terminates with orgies amongst the votaries of a very licentious description. This ceremony is entitled the Sri Chakra, or Purnabhisheka, the ring or full initiation. This method of adoring the Sakti is unquestionably acknowledged by the texts regarded by the Vanis as authorities for the excesses practiced. Wilson, on Hin, Sex, Vol. As Res Ward, on the Vaisnavas p. 309. In Gregory's works is to be found a significant comment. Noah prayed daily in the ark before the body of Adam, that is, before the phallus or regenerator, 66. The body of Adam was embalmed and transmitted from father to son, till at last it was delivered up by Lamech into the hands of Noah. Again, the middle of the ark was the place of prayer made holy by the presence of Adam's body. Gregory, p. 121. And so soon as ever the day began to break, Noah stood up towards the body of Adam, and prayed. Here was the origin of the Eucharist, as the reader will clearly see farther on. The most ancient monuments of idolatry among the Gentiles were consecrated pillars, or columns, which the Jews were forbidden to erect as objects of divine homage and adoration. And yet, a most extraordinary contradiction, this practice is conceived to arise from an imitation of Jacob, who took a stone and set it up, and further. This stone was held in great veneration in subsequent times by the Jews, and removed to Jerusalem. They were accustomed to anoint this stone, and from the word Bethel, the place where the pillar was erected, came the word Boetilia among the heathen, which signified rude stones or uprights, which they worshipped either as symbols of divinity or as true gods, animated by the heavenly power. Thence the name bowing stones amongst the Welsh, not as stones to be bowed to, but bowing of themselves, like the modern tipping discs or other supposed enchanted idols or consultative tables or objects. Indeed, it would seem not improbable that the erection of the Pillar of Jacob actually gave rise to the worship of Phallius among some of the pagan peoples. For, says Lewis, the learned Bochart asserts that the Phoenicians first worshipped this very stone which Jacob set up, and afterwards consecrated others in imitation and in reminder of it. 66. It is to little purpose that we are reminded that the Jews were forbidden by their law to make unto themselves any graven image. For as Lewis shows in the following passage, there may be exceptions to this, as to every other general rule. Notwithstanding, he says, the severity of the law against the making of images, yet, as Justin Martyr observes in his book against Trypho, it must be somewhat mysterious that God, in the case of the brazen serpent, should command an image to be made, for which. One of the Jews confessed he never could hear a reason from any of their doctors. According to Theodoret, Arnobius, and Clemens of Alexandria, the yoni of the Hindus was the sole object of veneration in the mysteries of Eleusis. Next, we have the golden calves set up by Jeroboam at Dan and Bethel. Then follows the worship of Gideon's ephod. The ephod made by Gideon with the spoil of the Midianites became after his death an object of idolatry. We have also Micah's images and the teraphim. We learn from St. Jerome that the Jews adored Baal Phagor, the Priapus of the Greeks and Romans. It was, he says, principally worshipped by women, colentibus maxime feminis. Maimonides observes that the adoration offered to this idol, called Peor, consisted in discovering Chemosh, probably the same as Baal Fear, also received the homage of the Jews, as also did Milcom, Molech, Baal Berith, and numerous others, all of the same sexual caste. From all this in regard to their irregular worship, or rather to their regular or assigned worship, it will be seen that the Jews fell into idolatry to an extent interpenetrating, again most mysteriously, the whole scope of their religion. There will consequently not appear anything so very startling in the supposition that the Ark of the Covenant contained symbolic objects referring to phallic ideas. We have seen that the stone, 66 or pillar, of Jacob was held in particular veneration and it was worshipped and anointed. We know from the Jewish records that the Ark was supposed to contain the tables of stone, and if it can be demonstrated that these stones implied a phallic reference, and that these tables were identical with the symbolism accompanying the sacred name Jehovah, Yehovah, or Yehovah, which written in unpointed Hebrew with 4 letters is Yev or IHVH. This process leaves us the 2 letters I and 5. Then if we add the I and the U, we have the Holy of Holies. We also have the Linga and Yoni and Arga of the Hindus, the Iswara, or Supreme Lord. In all this may be found, mystically, the Ark Celestial, replicating in upon itself symbolically and anagrammatically, and presenting itself as identical with the Lingayoni of the Ark of the Covenant. Gregory observes that the middle of the Ark was the place of prayer, made holy by the presence of Adam's body. Thence man was the Kabbalistic microcosmos, or little world, in contradistinction to the causer, or pattern, or original, macrocosmos, or great, or producing, or originating world.
Chapter the 37th. Doctrine and Rationale. The embodied children of the elements, both of heathen and of Christian periods. L'est avéré pour les théologiens et les philosophes que de la copulation de l'homme, mâle ou femelle, avec le démon naissent quelquefois des hommes. C'est de la sorte que doit naître l'Antichrist, suivant bon nombre de docteurs, Bellarmine, Suarez, Maluenda, et C. Ils observent en outre que par une cause toute naturelle, les enfants ainsi procréés par les incubes n'est pas applicable sont grands, très robustes, très audacieux, très superbes et très méchants. Voyez là-dessus Maluenda, quant à la cause en question. Il nous le donne d'après Valesius, archiatre de Reggio. Ce que les incubes introduisent in uteros n'est pas quelconque, n'est quantum conque, mais abondant, très chargé d'esprit et sans aucune sérosité. Ceci est d'ailleurs pour eux chose facile, ils n'ont qu'à choisir des hommes chauds, robustes, et quibus succumbants, puis des femmes de même tempérament, quibus incombants. Tels sont les termes de Valesius. Maluenda confirme ce qui a été dit plus haut, prouvant, pour le témoignage de
Chapter the 38th is a reflection on the knowledge of the compilers of all books treating of the history and topography of Kent, that perhaps the most remarkable man born in it, because his pursuits lay out of the beaten track of recognition or of praise, should not be mentioned in any of the descriptive or biographical works that we have met with concerning that county, undoubtedly one of the most interesting in England. In some general biographies and dictionaries, the name of Robert Flood, Doctor of Medicine, N.C., does occur, but the notices concerning his life are very scanty, possibly because there was little material for them existent in his own age. We have, in our studies of the Rosicrucian doctrines, purposely made the life of Dr. Robert Flood an object of close examination. We have searched for every possible personal memorial of him. We have been rewarded with, however, but fragmentary matter. Our information concerning his life is quite the reverse of extensive, notwithstanding our intimacy with his writings. Our ideas and conviction in regard of this truly great man being what they are, the extreme curiosity and the vivid interest, may be divined with which we set out on. Our first expedition to discover, and to make ourselves fully acquainted with, his place of birth and his own and the seat of his family. It was in the afternoon of a summer day that we sought out the village of Bursted, situate a few miles distant from Maidstone in Kent on the Ashford Road. Flood is buried in the ancient church of Bursted, a village, or rather hamlet, boasting an assemblage of larger or smaller houses around a green, none of any considerable pretension, cottages, neat specimens of English rural cottages they may be called, with small gardens, varying gables, and crossed lattices. There are woody grounds and picturesque hop plantations enclosing this quiet, homely-looking place, with its solemn church up in elevation in the corner of this extensive triangular green with excellent smooth cricket space in the center. Church in which he lies! What words for such a man! To us, or to any Rosicrucian student who knew who he was and what he had done, he was the whole country. His influence extended from and vivified everything, this the whole way from the Star, the old inn, or rather hotel, from which we had started in the morning in order to pilot our way thither, through the quiet country, passing few people and only small groups of cattle straggling along the sunshiny road. It was with feelings just as reverential, just as melancholy, and greatly as enthusiastic as those with which we contemplated the tomb of Shakespeare in Stratford-on-Avon, that we stood silent and absorbed, revolving many, many thoughts, before the oblong slab of dark slate-colored marble, which covered the place of last deposition of Robertus de Fluctibus, as into which parallel he had Latinized, according to the usage mostly of the Elizabethan period, his name, Robert Flood or Flood. Flood's monument occupies a large space of the wall of the chancel on the left hand, as you stand before the altar looking up the body of the small church towards the door. The monument is singularly like Shakespeare's, even allowing for the prevailing architectural fashion of the time. There is a seated on a book, as if half-length figure of Flood with his hand just raising his head, from reading, to look at you. The figure is nearly of life-size. There is, moreover, a very striking similarity in Dr. Flood's grand-thinking countenance to that of Shakespeare himself, and his brow has all the same breadth, and is as equally suggestive of knowledge and of power. The church of Bursted is very small and old. The square tower of the church is covered with masses of dark ivy. The grassy ground slopes with its burial mounds from about the foundation of the old building towards the somewhat distant village of Bursted. The churchyard descends in picturesque inclination, and is divided by a low brick wall, over which, here and there, flowers and overgrowth have broadly scaled from the garden of the old-fashioned, though neat-looking rustic, picturesque parsonage. There is a winding green lane with high hedges which leads down to the village. All is open and quietly rural. It is true English scenery, homely and still. The large trees and the abundance of turfy cover over the whole ground view pleases. The rustic impression and the deep country silence befit that spot where one of the most extraordinary thinkers in the English roll of original men lies at rest. When we were in this neighborhood, and on the first occasion that we sought out Bursted, it was a calm gray summer's afternoon. The still clouds, which seemed to prolong the gray general haze dwelling on the more distant landscape, were impressive of a happy, quietly happy repose. And as we stood on our return towards Maidstone, having spent, we believe, upwards of 3 hours in meditative notice, either in the church or musing and strolling round it, the slopes of the hop grounds presented a field of view of light, lovely green. Out of this low-lying landscape to which we reverted, Bursted church tower rose small. It has 4 sculptured bears at the 4 angles for pinnacles to the square tower. These miniature bears perched upon the summit looked to me at about half a mile's tants like 4 crows. The distant wooded hills showed faint to the eye. There was no wind. The air was warm and silent. The country was green and luxuriant. Robert Flood was a brother of the Rosy Cross. He is called the English Rosicrucian. To those who never heard his name, the titles of his books will suffice to prove the wonderful extent of his erudition and the strange mystical character of the man. We would warn every inquirer to place not the least reliance upon any account which they may meet of Robert Flood in any of the ordinary biographies, or in any encyclopedia or other book professing to give an account of the Rosicrucians. We beg the curious not to believe one word, except dates, and scarcely these, that are to be found in accepted scientific treatises, or otherwise, purporting to speak of Flood, or of his compeers. These are all at fault and ignorant, particularly and generally. Robert Flood was the second son of Sir Thomas Flood, Treasurer of War to Queen Elizabeth. The name was originally Lloyd, and the family came from Wales. Robert Flood was born at Millgate House, of which edifice one corner still remains built in the manor house which was erected on its site when the old house fell to ruin. Millgate House is situated near Berstead. Flood was born in the year 1574. He was entered at St. John's College, Oxford, in 1591. He traveled for 6 years in France, Spain, Italy, and Germany. He was a member of the College of Physicians, London. He was MB, MD, BA, and MA. The latter degree he took in 1605. He began to publish in 1616. He died at his house in Coleman Street, London, in the year 1637. Flood is also stated by Fuller to have lived in Fanchurch Street. The list of Flood's works comprise the following. 3. Monocordon Mundi Symphoniarum, so replicatio ad apologiam Johannes Kepleri. Frankfurt, 1620. 4. Anatomia Theatrum Triplici Effigi Designatum. At the same place, 1623. 5. Philosophia Sacra et Vir Christiana, seu Meteorologia Cosmica. At the same place, 1626. 6. Medicina Catholica, sei Mysterium Artis Medicandi Sacrarium. The same. 1626. 7. Integrum Morborum Mysterium. The same. 1631. Clavis Philosophiae et Alchemiae. The same. 1633. 9. Philosophia Mosaica. Gande, 1638. Io, Pathologia Daemoniaca. The same, 1640. The above account of Flood's Rosicrucian works is from Fuller's Worthies. There are notices of Dr. Flood in the Athena et Fasti Oxoniensis, in Chalmers' Biographical Dictionary, under the names of Flood, Mersenne, and Gassendi, in Granger's Celebrated Characters, and in Renaudot Conferences Publiques, Tom 4, page 87. Also in Brooker, upon Flood's monument, there are 2 marble books bearing the following titles, Mysterium Cabalisticum and Philosophia Sacra. There were originally 8 books represented in all, studding the front of the tablet. The inscription to his memory is as follows.
7. Dimensis 7. A degrees D. NDC extract 7. Odoribus verna operat crypta tigetineris, NEC speciosa, trius ovad mortalem tibi. Comitimus vinum ingeni viven hic monumenta tuinam tibi qui similis scribit moritur qui sepulchrum pro tota aeternum posteritet facit. Hoc monumentum Thomas Floodgore covertein orum apud Cantianos armiger info illissimum in carissimi patrui sui memoriam erexit. Dimensis Augusti, MDC extrixit. In the life of the astronomer Gassendi will be found some mention of the career and of the distinctions of Robert Flood. The work of Gassendi's bearing the title Epistolica Exercitatio, in qua Principio Principia Philosophiae Roberti Fludi edugontur, it ad recens Ilias Libris adversus Petrum Marinum Mercenum Scripto responditer, and was printed at Paris in 1628.
This piece was reprinted in the 3rd volume of Gassendi's works published at Paris in 1658, under the title of Examen Philosophiae Floodinae. And C. Flood wrote 2 books against Mercennus, who had assailed his philosophy. The title of the first book was Sophia Cumoria Certamen, in quo lapis Lydius a falso structore patrimarino Merceno, monachio reprobatus, voluminis sui Babylonici, in genesi figurata accurate examinat.
This work was published in folio at Frankfurt in 1629. The name of the second book was Summum Bonorum quod est virum magiae, cabalae, alchemiae, fratrum Rose Crucis viarum, subjectum indictarum scientiarum laudem, in insignis calumniatoris Fr. Mar, Merceni dedicus publicatum, per Joachim Frisium, 1629.
In this book, which we now bring to a close in its 2nd edition, we have traced and expounded the philosophy of the authentic Rosicrucians as developed in the folios of the celebrated Dr. Flood Robertus de Fluctibus. We are the first author who has brought forward Flood's name to the reading world, justified his claims, and made him known through the most labored and long-studied translation with continual reference to hundreds of books in all languages, dead and living, which bore reference to Flood's sublimest philosophical speculations. All the world has heard of the Rosicrucians. Few or none have ever taken the trouble to ascertain whether the stupendous and apparently audacious claims of these philosophers were rightly or wrongly estimated, that is, whether to be adjudged as founded on the rock of truth or seeking steadiness and root only in the sands of delusion. The author began his inquiries in the year 1850 in a spirit of the utmost disbelief, thus taught by the world's assumptions and opinions. Much of this indoctrinated preoccupation the wise man has to unlearn in his progress through life. Fogs and prejudices and prepossessions cleared from the author's mind as he advanced. After the very considerable space of 28 years of study of the Rosicrucians, the author of this work ends, as he ends. Let the candid reader himself judge in what frame of mind the author of the Rosicrucians concludes. How should anyone complete an inquiry in regard to the majestic brothers of the Rosicrucians, otherwise the Rosicrucians? The story of the Rosicrucians is of the widest interest. The proof of this fact lies in the accumulation of letters from persons in every condition of life addressed to the authors of the present work since the publication of the first edition from all parts of the world, anonymously, or with particulars of names. And C. The celebrated author of the Confessions of an English Opium Eater, in his historico-critical inquiry into the origin of the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, originally published in the London Magazine of January 1824, also continued in the succeeding number, has this remarkable passage: Rosicrucianism is not Freemasonry. The esoterici, at whose head Bacon stood, and who afterwards composed the Royal Society of London, were the antagonist party of the Theosophists, Kabbalists, and Alchemists, at the head of whom stood Flood, and from whom Freemasonry took its rise. Thus we leave the Rosicrucians as men, in the same mystery as that state of really impenetrable mystery in which we find them. Let the mask and the mystery still remain before them, concealing them and their purposes in the world. As it is enjoined, the Rosicrucian cross on a Calvary, pyramid, supplementary notes. The first, notice of an ancient work, the following extraordinary work, which is so rare and so valuable in its original edition that we have reason to believe the authors of the Rosicrucians can congratulate themselves in being the possessors in all probability of the only copy in existence, was suppressed, wherever found, on its appearance. The author, in reality, was never known. It is considered probable that this book had a paramount effect in bringing about and encompassing the success of the Reformation.
Esse. Disputatio nova contra mulieres, qua probatur ies hominis non anno, MD exivi. Tis stimulieribus, quod hominis non sint. Cum in Samaria, ut in campo omnes licencii, librum secreter et docere Iesum Christum, filium Dei Salvatorem et Redemptorum animarum nostrarum, una cum Spiritus Sancto non esse Deum, licebit opiner etiam mihi credere, quod multo minus est, mulieres scidice non esse homines, et quod inde sequitur, Christum ergo praes, non esse passum, nec ies salvari. Si enim non solum in hoc reino tolerantur, se etiam amangatibus premis afficientur, qui blasphement creaturum, cur ego exilium aut supplicium timere deveo, qui simpliciter convicia creaturum. Resertim cum io modo ex sacris literis probata possim, mulierem non esse hominem, quo illi probant Christum non esse Deum. Admonitio theologica facultatis in Academia Wittenbergensi, et scholasticum juventutem, de libello famoso et blasphemo recens sparso, cujus titulus est, disputatio nova contra milies, qua ostenditur, iis homines, non es. Wittenberge, excudebat vidua Mattei Velaci, anno MD exivi. 66 Defensio Sexus Mulibri, opposita futilissime disputatio recens edite, qua suppresso authoris et topographi nomina blasphem contenditur, mulieres hominis nan esse. Simon Gedicus, S. Theol, Doct. And C. Lipsex, apud Henricum Samuelem Scipio. Nem, anno MDCC 7th Octohergus Desert, rarissima credit, valiet Acidalius. Vide, inter alios, Freitagi analecta de libris rarioribus, p. 5.
Acidalius died, aged 2008 years only, 1595. Hallam's Lit, HP 14. This is only surmise. The authorship of the book is unknown. It was rigorously suppressed. The second, The Ark of Noah. Supplementary notes to the engravings at pp. 351 and 340. Note to Plate Mysterium. The explanation of this engraving will be found at page 351.
The ancient volume from which it is taken is very rare and bears the following title: 66 Antiquitat Viam Ivdae Corviam. In quis, praeter iude, Hierosolimorum, et templi Salomonis accuratam delineationem, precipui sacri assi, profani gentilis ritus describuntur.
Adiectis formis Ennius, Elvigidani Batavorum. Ex officina Plantiniana apud Franciscum Raphaelengium, 1593. 66. The Ark of Noah, the medium of escape from the deluge, and the mythic means of the perpetuation of the human family. The post-diluvian signs of the zodiac are here correctly designated as in number 12. Let the judicious reader remark that 12 times 30 are 360, which is not the number of the degrees of this symbolical plan. There are 12 divisions in this ark. The center space is that through which the dove, or raven, escaped out into the open in search of its new home, or into the restored world when the waters went down or disappeared. Each of the 12 spaces in the accompanying plan contains 25 degrees, which make an aggregate of 300 degrees. The mythical figure contained in the ark is presumably that of Noah. It is also evidently the symbolical figure of the Savior, and typically only that of Noah, for the hands are crossed, and the feet and hands bear the marks of the incision, the nails of the crucifixion. 25. The number of the degrees in each space or sign of this Noachic ark, arca, or chest are the number of the knights of the garter, with the reserved 26th, or kingly or sovereign seat. In this respect, the ark may be regarded as the grand mythic idea of the Round Table, as that was the production of the central mythic idea of the sangreal or sangreal, referred to engraving at p. 351, and the Rosicrucian comment upon the same. See pages 340th, 341st, 345th, 340th, 351, and the whole of the chapter referring to the origin of the Order of the Garter. 66th. The third note with its Kabbalistic illustrations. The sangreal grial or holy grial. The engraving at p. 340 gives the mystical idea, or suggestion, of the Round Table of the Knights of King Arthur, which is again typical of the sangreal. The romance of Guillot, or at least the traditional fable of the sangreal, spread over France, Germany, and England. In the 12th century, the dogma of transubstantiation not being yet defined by the Church, the chalice, the mark of the Knights Templars, had not the deep mystic meaning which it received in the following century. The grail signifies a vase. The sangreal is identified with the vessel in which Jesus celebrated the Holy Supper, and which also was used to receive his blood flowing from the wound inflicted upon him by the centurion Longinus. Walter Mapes, the historian of the sangreal, ascribes to it a supernatural origin. He gave out that God was its real author, and had revealed it in a celestial vision to a holy hermit of Britain towards the year AD. 720. This writer makes Joseph one of the coryphoi of his history of the sangreal. After 42 years of captivity, Joseph of Arimathea, the guardian of the grail or greal, is at last set at liberty by the Emperor Vespasian. In possession of the sacred vessel and a few more relics, and accompanied by his relations and disciples, Hebron and Elaine the fisherman, he travels over a part of Asia, where he converts Inalak, king of Sarras. He then goes to Rome, and thence to Britain, where he preaches the gospel and performs 34 miracles. He settles in the island Yeniswitrin, Isle of Glass, or Glastonbury, where he founds an abbey, and institutes the Round Table, in imitation of the Holy Supper, which was partaken of at a round table with the 12 disciples in their mythical double places, 24 in all, and with the double chief seat, or cathedra, for the president, or the savior. Lastly, the Apostle of the Britons builds a palace, in which he preserves his precious relics, the sacred cup, which takes the name of Sangreal, the bloody spear, with which the centurion Longinus pierced the side of the Lord, from whence issued blood and water, the Rosicrucian heraldic colors, Mars red, Luna argent. There are 8 angels, one to each half heaven, or dark or light sides, guarding the 4 corners of the world. The sacred cup is identified with the vessel of the Holy Supper. The Templars are the successors of the Knights of the Round Table. Their successors again were the Knights of Malta, with their 8 langs, or nations, each represented in a blade of, or ray, of the 8-pointed red Templar cross. 2a. The Temple Church London was dedicated to St. Mary. The Greal is a sort of oracle. It is, so to speak, at the orders of the Mother of God to execute all her commands. Parzival, the German champion hero, thinks of transporting the Greal to the east from whence it originally came. He takes the Sangreal, embarks at Marseille with the Templars, and arrives at the court of his brother Firefix in India. The sacred cup manifests a desire that Parzival should remain possessor of the Greal, and only change his name into that of Prester John. Parzival and the Templars settle in India. After the disappearance of the Greal in the west, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, losing the central object, or the rose of the table, go on a scattered championship in search of it. They travel over the world, but in vain they cannot find the Greal, for it is forever hidden in the far east, or in the land of the sun. Wolfram von Eschenbach tells us that Meister Guillot le Provençal found at Toledo an Arabian book, written by an astrologer named Phlegetanes, containing the story of the marvelous vase called Greal. The sacred vase, or the Sangreal, was placed, according to the myth of Guillot, in a temple, guarded by Knights Templiers or Tempois. The temple of the Greal was placed upon a mountain in the midst of a thick wood. The name of this mysterious mountain hints sublimity and secrecy. Guillot calls it Mont Salva, wild or inaccessible mountain. The Greal was made of a wonderful stone called Exilus, which had once been the most brilliant jewel in the crown of the archangel Lucifer. The gem was emerald. The stone was brought from heaven by angels and left to the care of Titurel, the first king of the Greal, who transmitted it to Amfortas, the second king, whose sister Herceloide was the mother of Parzival, the third king of the Sangreal. A great many towns pretended to possess this holy relic. In 1247, the Patriarch of Jerusalem sent the Sangreal to King Henry III of England as having belonged to Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. The inhabitants of Constantinople, about the same time, also fancied that a vessel which they had long esteemed as a sacred relic was the Sangreal. The Genoese also felt certain that their Santo Catino, to lick dishes, catinis, I am a dish, was nothing else than the Sangreal. The same modifications of the myth are to be noticed in a romance in prose entitled Perceval le Gallois. Not only is the Round Table considered in this book as an imitation of the Holy Supper, but the author goes so far as to give it Round Table, the name of Sangreal itself. In the romance towards the end of the 13th century, it is said that the Round Table instituted by Joseph in imitation of the Holy Supper was called Grail, that Joseph induced Arthur's father to create a third Round Table in honor of the Holy Trinity. Of Merlin, written, The Sangreal, an inquiry into the origin and signification of the romances of the Sangreal, by Dr. F. G. Bergman, Dean of the Faculty of Letters at Strasbourg, and member of the Royal Society of Antiquaries, Copenhagen, Edinburgh, Edmonston and Douglas, 1870. We quote the above in parts. 1. Rose crucified. 2. Rose restored to life. 3. Consummation. Honi soit qui mal y pense. The Round Table is the rationale or apotheosis of the most noble, the Order of the Garter. The Round Table of King Arthur is a grand mythological synthesis. It is a whole mythology in itself. It is perennial. It is Christian. By tradition, the Round Table of King Arthur devolves from the very earliest period. The illustration opposite page 340 was copied from the original with great care and attention. King Arthur in the principal seat is idealized in the person of King Henry VIII, in whose time the Round Table is supposed to have been repaired and refaced. In the Revolution, Cromwell's soldiery, after the capture of Winchester, and in the fury at the imputed idea of idolatry, made a target of it. The marks of many balls are still conspicuous. The 5-leaved roses typify the 10 original signs of the zodiac: red rose, 5 signs, white rose, 5 signs, dissension. The whole is radiant, from the seed spot, or golden sun, in the center. This double rose, barbed or thorned, Sol, is the Tudor rose, denoting the union of the houses of York and Lancaster in the person of Harry VIII. It will be observed that each knight of the Round Table is seated as at the base of an obelisk. The architectural obelisk art form is universal all the world over, both in old times and modern times. The Egyptian obelisks are sacred to the sun. The paladins of Charlemagne were 12 in number. The marshals of France should be 12 in number. The judges of England, according to old constitutional rationale, should be 12, as the number of a jury are 12. All these are mythical of the 12 signs, or divisions, of the zodiac, the 12 Jewish tribes, the 12 oracular stones in the breastplate of the high priest of the Jews, and, in the Christian aspect of the mysticism, the 12 apostles, with the reprobate condemned central sign as Judas, the traitor. The whole is Kabbalistic in the highest degree, and therefore ordinarily unintelligible. It signifies the second dispensation, or the astrological reproduction and rearrangement of the zodiac, when the original 10 signs of the ecliptic became 12, and when the mystic system underwent the greatest change, presenting a new traditionary and reproductive face. Concluding note. Remarks upon 2 curious books. The following old book is a very extraordinary one, as the design and tendency of it will puzzle most persons who are acquainted with the nature of the antagonistic relations which were supposed to exist between the Church of Rome and the Rosicrucians.
The book is exceedingly scarce and valuable. Rosa Jesuitica oder jesuitische Rottgesellen. Das ist eine Frage, ob die Zwienorden, der genannten Ritter von den Heerscharen Jesu und der Rosenkreuzer ein einiger Ordensen, per Jahr PDE, Seite Jesuiterum Protectorum. Frage 1620.
This is a truly curious tract upon the relations of the Jesuits and the Rosicrucians, a very curious book upon the subject of the peculiar and fanciful attributed notions of the Rosicrucians, and which drew a large amount of surprised and left-handed attention when it first appeared, was that which bore the title Comte de Gabalis ou Entretien sur les sciences secrètes, renouvelle et augmente d'une lettre sur ce sujet. This book was brought out at Cologne. The printer's name was Pierre Marteau. Bound up with a copy in the possession of the present authors of the Rosicrucians is another volume bearing the following title, La suite du Comte de Gabalis ou Nouveau Entretien sur les sciences secrètes du cherchant à nouvelle philosophie. This latter work was published at Amsterdam, with no year mentioned of its publication, by Pierre Mortier. Upon the title page of the first named of these books appears the rescript A quod tanto impendio absconditur, etiam solum modo demonstrare destruere est. Tertul. Extraordinary Curiosity, printed by Ballantyne, Hanson and Company, Edinburgh and London. 1. Shadow and Windus's list of books about The Fella, an Egyptian novel. by Edmund About. Translated by Sir Randall Roberts. Post 8 VO, illustrated boards 28. Cloth limp, 2 seconds. 6D. Adams works by A Dictionary of the Drama, being a comprehensive guide to the plays. Playwrights, players, and playhouses of the United Kingdom and America from the earliest to the present times. Crown 8 VO, half-bound 12 seconds. 6D. Preparing. Latter-day lyrics. Edited by W. Davenport Adams. Post 8 VO, cloth limp, 2 seconds. 6D. Quips and quiddities, selected by W. Davenport Adams. Post 8 VO, cloth limp, 2 seconds. 6D. Advertising a history of from the earliest times. Illustrated by anecdotes, curious specimens, and notices of successful advertisers. By Henry Sampson. Crown 8 VO, with colored frontispiece and illustrations, cloth gilt 78. 6D. Agony column of the Times, from 1800 to 1870. Edited with an introduction by Alice Clay. Post 8 VO, cloth limp, 2 seconds. 6D. Aid works by Carr of Carrion. Post 8 VO, illustrated boards 28. Confidences, post 8 VO, illustrated boards 28. Alexander, Maid, Wife, or Widow P. A Romance, by Mrs. Alexander. Post 8 VO, illustrated boards. CR 8 VO, cloth extra 38. 6D. Allen works by The Evolutionist at Large. Second edition revised, CR 8 VO CL. Extra 6 seconds, vignettes from nature. Crown 8 VO, cloth extra 68. Colin Clout's calendar. Crown 8 VO, cloth extra 68. Architectural Styles, a handbook of. Translated from the German of a Rosengarten by W. Coletti Sanders. Crown 8 VO, cloth extra, with 639 illustrations, 78. 6D. Art of Amusing, a collection of graceful arts, games, tricks, puzzles, and charades, by Frank Bellew. With 300 illustrations. CR 8 VO, cloth extra 4 seconds. 6D. Artemis Ward. Artemis Ward's works, the works of Charles Farrer Brown, better known as Artemis Ward. With portrait and facsimile. Crown CO, cloth extra 7 seconds. 6D. Artemis Ward's lecture on the Mormons. With 32 illustrations. Edited with preface by Edward P. Hingston. Crown 8 VO 6D. The Genial Showman, Life and Adventures of Artemis Ward, by Edward P. Hingston. With a frontispiece. Crown 8 VO, cloth extra 38. 6D. Ashton works by A History of the Chapbooks of the 18th Century, with nearly 400 illusts, engraved in facsimile of the originals. CR 8 VO CL X 7 seconds. 6D. Social Life in the Reign of Queen Anne, from original sources, with nearly 100 illusts. CR CL X 78.6D. Humor, wit, and satire of the 17th century,